Well, thank you all again for being here, and for those of you who weren't in the room earlier, my name is Ellen Shue Holland. I'm not related to Holland and Knight, but at any rate, we got part of this there, right? And I come from 27 years of being a risk manager and chief risk officer at various places throughout the country, primarily in higher ed. And about a year ago, I went into independent risk management consulting with my firm, Strategic Risk Frameworks, focusing on strategic risk, resilience and crisis management, and also cybersecurity for risk managers. And I'm very pleased to be presenting with Carol Fox, and I'll let her take that one.
So again, welcome. Thank you for being here. I just wanted to mention a little bit about REMS. We're a not-for-profit risk management professional organization based in New York. We're on Broadway now, so we're migrated to Broadway. And we work...
Within a minute, AD's going to set you up.
Okay.
How's that?
So the third time will be the charm, I promise you. So while we're waiting, what are some of the questions you've come with today? You obviously took the session. What are your pain points? What are you trying to solve for today by attending the session? Anybody? Just curious?
No, I mean, my always the problem I found is setting a universe for the risk management. You know, what are the components of that?
Okay, well, we're going to try to touch on that.
So he wants to know about the universe of risk management. We will touch on that, yes.
Yeah.
Another question?
Also, making sure that we have alignment and sponsorship from the business.
Absolutely. Critical.
Ideally the board, because they have oversight of cyber risk, but that's sometimes a real quantum leap for people to think about.
Absolutely.
So following up on what he said, with the board's responsibility for cyber risk, helping them understand what that is, because they hear the buzzwords, but they really don't know what it is.
Good point.
And it's also part of their overall management oversight requirements, particularly for publicly traded companies, for all the risk of the organization. And we'll talk about this. Okay.
So I think we're good.
First question, would this presentation be updated to us?
Yes.
So one of our greatest challenges, because the remit is so large for a large organization in terms of reducing risk and implementing all of these various things with the application managers, that there's just so much work to do that they can't even fathom getting it done. So how do you divide out which is going to be risk accepted versus which pieces they can actually achieve without letting them just open the gates and let them say no to everything that we're asking them.
Absolutely.
Along that line, the application managers in our organization rely on a line of business or local area risk manager, and there are literally dozens of risk managers at that equivalent peer level throughout the organization. And as the saying goes, your mileage will vary. Some are very detailed, understand the risks, and do a good evaluation. Some of them, frankly, sometimes you wonder whether they understand the technology and what the line of business is doing, which is what you have to have good view into both and understand both, because you're doing the balancing ultimately. And some of them, let's put it this way, very unsure that the decisions are accurate from my perspective. And I don't have, in many cases, the knowledge of the business.
Following a lot of that, which areas are seen as acceptable to transfer the risk, primarily rather than take care of it or mitigate it locally?
So I have a question for you, because in our sessions we allow the facilitators to ask questions too. How many of you had conversations with your counterparts in risk management or with the board or with the executive team? Do you feel like you're isolated? So I didn't see any hands raised to answer the question.
My prior company, Yes.
Yes.
My current company, absolutely opposite. They're very much engaged.
Okay. So you've identified some very important topics, and we're going to try to address some of them. A lot of them has to do with whether you're in a learning organization or a non-learning organization. And the way that is described, and I don't have a citation for you, but I can get it, is that learning organizations are willing to listen, adapt, and learn. Those that you go to and they think they know it all, you kind of dead in the water to begin with. So I think sometimes it's an assessment of your organization. There are certain competencies as well. You said we've got risk managers who don't seem to even understand the business. So having that conversation and building a foundational baseline about what the organization is doing and how it delivers it, a very proactive risk management approach would be to sit down with the entire IT team, the information security team, the business teams to understand how do we actually deliver on our mission? What are the components? What's our value chain? As a very, very first kind of baseline. But if you don't understand the business, it's a non-starter. You really can't start there. So we'll talk a little bit more about some tools and techniques and how standards are changing to more help enable those conversations.
All right, thank you. Very good questions, and we will try to answer those along the way. And one thing to many of your points would be one word, and that's culture. And in impacting the culture is an opportunity with this type of program. So what we're going to talk about today, 3 objectives: understanding the similarities between ISO 31000 and ISO 27000. And Carol has some great information on that for you. We'll also look at the expertise to manage strategic and cyber risk, and then we'll show you how to add value to the C-suite. One of the opportunities we have, particularly today, and particularly after hearing our keynote, we just kept glancing at each other. It was wonderful to hear the keynote address. And one thing that we have the opportunity to do is really build bridges between the operational risk management and the cybersecurity professionals. And I will start out with a little saying that I heard Madeline Albright talking at an event a few years ago, and Condoleezza Rice was in the room too. And Madeline said one thing that was important to her was the difference between certainty and confidence. And I think if we start out thinking about those 2 things today, this applies very well to risk management and what we're talking about. With certainty, you have an absolute. You know something will happen or it will not happen. With confidence, you have to build that foundation. You have to continue learning, add layers and layers of knowledge, and be flexible and evolve as the industry evolves. So think of those 2 things as we go through our discussion today, and I think we're seeing our industries evolve together with greater confidence so that we can help our entities along the way.
Pardon me, even though you may prefer questions to the end, will we have easy access to the deck? Because certain things, even if we do, we may like to take photos now, but knowing that we'll have the deck.
You will.
Perfect.
Make that available.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So I'll talk lightly about this slide. This was part of the presentation for REMS a couple of years ago, where we actually started talking about bringing the IT community, and it's been talked about for some time. But in this presentation, we had an underwriter from Beasley, which is one of the key insurers for cyber risk. We had a gentleman from Kroll, who was a cyber forensics expert and former Secret Service. We also had a gentleman who was, at that time, the special agent in charge for North Texas. And he's gone on to the financial industry, so that'll be good for many of you. But we noticed the similarities, and one conversation I had with a researcher in cybersecurity and a former director for NSA really was asking me a lot of questions one day about risk managers and cybersecurity, and I couldn't answer them. I just said, Brett, I don't know. Do I have to go be a coder? And he said, no, you already know risk management. You know the framework. And when I sat down and looked at these 2, they're very, very close. So I'll let Carol go ahead and talk about what she's been doing of late.
So this is out of these bridging the digital risk gap. So if you the other here as well. But as we sat down with Asaka and started talking about our different viewpoints in terms of the approach and the risks related to it, we learned very quickly that we actually speak a different language. And we don't necessarily always understand what the other one is saying. So we thought it would be helpful as a place to start to look at the NIST framework, expansion framework, and just apply this. This is from REMS. It's actually an ANSI, it's an American National Standard, Risk Assessment Standard. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but we work with ASIS, so the brick-and-mortar kind of security people, to come up with a common way to look at risk assessments. If we relate to against each other, they align very, very well. So I don't think that the concepts aren't so different as much as maybe some of the language that we use. And the other thing that became apparent is that as risk management has evolved, we've become more business enablers. So rather than saying, can we accept this risk, we're really looking at how can we enable the organization to do what it is within the risk they want to accept. So risk, I had someone say one time, risk can never be eliminated. Never. So just get that one off the table. There's a certain amount of risk we live with every day. We do that as a human being. But it's really having that conversation is, does this fit within the enterprise's risk appetite and risk tolerances? So what we saw with some of the security people we're dealing with was all about protection, a very important element. You absolutely have to do that, especially against bad actors. But that's kind of the name of the game. You really need both sides to say, how can we help the organization meet its mission or meet its strategy? Yeah, so I'm going to throw a few more frameworks at you as if you don't have enough already. And the two at the top I actually worked on. And one of the big changes in both of the ISO 31000 on risk management and the COSO ERM framework was a bit of a pivot from talking about risk management to talking about the organization. So it's really a change in focus and lens, starting with the organization. Someone said earlier, understanding the organization, what are we trying to accomplish, and then looking at that ecosystem, both internally and externally, and then how does risk management integrate? We talk about frameworks as if we're going to build a new house. Well, the house is already built. The framework is really a way to help us integrate into the house that's already built. So that's the first one. There are other references there. We, in the United States, in my view, got kind of off track on risk management with Sarbanes-Oxley because it was all about financial controls, and that consumed so much energy within organizations where, as they work with the rest of the organization, the nations and countries that contribute to ISO 31000 and to COSO, they didn't have that distraction. And I will tell you, they don't call this strategic risk management, they just call it risk management. They don't even call it enterprise risk management. They keep saying it's enterprise risk management. So just to give you a little bit of context there. And it really is the real pivot that happened in both of those standards was integrating risk management, not only the business processes and the strategy planning, but where decisions are taken within your organization. So I know when I was working in the corporate world, a lot of times we would have strategic initiatives around IT. In fact, I had one CIO who came to me and said, we have 17 strategic initiatives that I want you involved in every one of them. I'll tell you a little story about that later. But the point of the matter is, it really is risk flags within the decision making, because that's when you can really make an influence. And so that's my kind of message today. Having the conversation with your internal counterparts in risk management will really help when you can take that conversation to before the decision is actually made. Sometimes you get involved after the decision is already made, and then in the worst case, you're already down the road and you're just putting out fires. So where do you play within that decision-making process? And I would say the full continuum will really make a difference. So,
all right, so some of the fundamentals that we both share from the cyber and the operational risk side include we want to identify the risks, assess the risks, implement a plan, review the results, and monitor. And to someone's question earlier, how do you know they're doing what they're doing? Metrics help a great deal with that. Established metrics, KPIs, key risk indicators, etc. The metrics help, and then making sure that they have the need to show those metrics and utilize those metrics, and it rolls up to the strategy over time. The principles apply to all risks, really. You want to pre-plan an incident response. I've used a program called Resilience and Crisis Management, implemented programs 3 or 4 places. And the one thing that I always find is a functional area that wants to manage their risk all the way to the top, but when they get to the claim portion, they don't know what to do. And it's not because they're not smart, it's not what they're trained in. I've seen that from facilities management and also cyber. But you want to make sure you pre-plan how you're going to do these and how all of these things integrate over time. You want to practice. You want to make sure that your team is included when you have an incident, and I mean included immediately, and then that you have appropriate claims management with an appropriate team. And we'll go over a few things here and there, but I can tell you having an exercise is a great way to reinforce for everybody in a positive way the need for that integrated approach in managing risk. And we'll talk a little more about that in a little bit. So you are all familiar with ISO 27000. This comes really from the CISSP, which I've been reading so risk managers don't have to. And it's very similar in many ways to what we've been looking at. We want to secure the asset at the end of the day. It starts with people. It really starts with people. People are the root cause, human error, of 27 to 30% of cyber risk incidents. So by looking at infrastructure, many of these frameworks started out being internal audit related or driven by hardware. People were looking very closely internally. We have to look externally at the whole ecosystem. But you can see the 8 responsibility areas or 8 domains. And you're all familiar with those: security, security, security. And then if we look at a picture of this as well, the core data here, that's what we're after, protect that. Well, what does that data have? It's got people's health history, it's got people's private, personally identifiable information, all of the government officials, it's got all their top security issues, as we learned. And but it still starts here with that outer shell. Who has their access to the pulse of the hardware or the data to begin with? So we really have to step out and look at the full ecosystem.
And if I could just add a little story on communication, I mentioned that our CIO asked me to get involved in one. One was a single sign-on portal. So our software engineers were working on that, and so we got involved in it. And my question was, so what security arrangements are you putting in? What technology are we doing to make sure what access are we giving here? And they said, well, that's not up to us. That would be up to the users. And I said, oh, well, who's using it? And what kind of information are you anticipating being in there? Well, we've been told one of our stakeholders is HR. And then our new products, research and development, they want a way into the portal as well. And I said, is it going to be easier for you to build those security items into the portal as you're building it, as opposed to coming back and trying to modify what you've already done? So just those conversations, and I know you're looking at me saying, are you crazy? What were they thinking? That's what I said, are you crazy? But I think that communication and having your risk management people, and people understand the bigger business needs and what you're trying to deliver at those initial conversations in particular to identify the risk, not just to the project or to the initiative, but the overall business.
Absolutely. If we look at lines of defense a little closer, from a risk management perspective, I worked at 4 different universities across the country. It doesn't matter which time zone you're in or if it's international. You always protect life safety first. And the more embedded cybersecurity is with infrastructure. It manages your HVAC systems. If you have labs with dangerous chemicals, it actually manages those. We've been able, at one university, we were able to model and view when the fume hoods were open or closed. Quite a safety hazard. Imagine if the wrong person or a disgruntled student decided to hack into that and open the fume hood at the wrong time, or close it, causing an explosion. So life safety is always first. We often think of active assailants, we think of VIP events, football, we've got national, the baseball, everything going on right now, National Football League, baseball leagues, and all of these games going on. We've got presidential elections, which can get work with Secret Service that, again, they do their job. I'm not one of them, but I admire the law enforcement activities that go on. But at the same time, we have all these things we have to protect first and foremost, because if you don't protect the life safety, or rather, if you do protect the life safety, you can protect the reputation of your organization. If you do that, that will help protect the financial sustainability and the bottom line. Once you do that, the operations, and then the assets as well.
So in COSO, they made a bit of a pivot. There's still lines of defense in COSO, your own framework, but they now call it lines of responsibility. So you're talking about not only these important lines of defense, but who within these important lines of defense is accountable for making sure that security, those defensive postures are adequate.
Absolutely. Let's talk about leveraging our expertise, because this is really where we can grow together, build that foundation of confidence over time. I took a look at some of the industries. This is certainly exposure and impact is not a comprehensive, an exhaustive list or a comprehensive list, but it gives you a little bit of an idea of what the things are that you're dealing with. Healthcare, patient safety, website. Imagine too, if you're working with a patient, you're in a surgery room, someone hacks into the equipment associated with the surgery, and your patient fails to make it out of the room. The criticality of that is just as critical it was before a lot of the IT issues were around, and that would have been concern for power. And now we see rolling blackouts in California as well. But the life safety associated with all of these things, websites, infrastructure, etc., all weighs in on your reputation over time. And reputation is probably one of the top, behind life safety, the top risk that we see, I would say, globally right now. Yes?
Might you add to the financial institution's exposure institutional investor information that's highly confidential and proprietary,
Yes.
dealing with buy-side and sell-side trading data and related information?
Right. So investor trading data, very sensitive trading data in higher education. For those of you who donate to your higher education institutions, you have a vested interest in making sure that the Alumni Association or the development group has your information protected, because it's always the biggest donors, all the names in town, right?
Yeah.
It's always on a separate server somewhere. It used to be. So some of the other factors influencing, this is a bit of an eye chart, but if we look sometimes with risk, it's the low value or the low dollar cost. It's just ingenuity, and it's basic things that you can work on that they don't have to cost millions of dollars. But just having the right processes in place can help. And so on this side, we're showing things that give value. And on this side, we're showing things that cost money in order to protect your organization. And this is from the Data Breach Study 2018 by the Common Institute. Anyone know that group?
Yes.
As well? Very impressive study, sponsored by IBM. I like it because an incident response team shouldn't cost you a lot of money. But having everybody in the room and ready to go on the bad day is important. I can tell you that with the incident response teams I've worked with, the best ones meet either monthly, and you'll have the core group of people, and we'll talk about those in a bit. You'll have them in a room monthly to talk about your pre-incident planning, because If you pre-incident plan for 2-3 years, and then you have that one incident, you'll be like a well-oiled machine in that EOC, Emergency Operations Center, on the date of the loss. So these are things, encryption, business continuity involvement, employee training, it's people up here. It's a lot of people activity. That doesn't have to cost a lot, and it can certainly help lessen your concerns. Human error, 27%.
On the last slide, the most costly one is third-party involvement. I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, that means that you're relying, in some way, you're outsourcing, you're relying on a
Yes.
third party
Absolutely.
to perform the service for you.
Your supply chain.
Yeah, and it's not just
Absolutely.
third party, it could be third, fourth, and fifth party, as far as that supply chain goes.
As a consultant, now I'm having to sign all those contracts that I used to make consultants sign. So, and I take it extremely seriously. But yes, it's consulting. It can be your third party. In fact, in mining, some of the things that they've been able to encrypt, or not encrypt, but they've been able to utilize to hack into systems have been the iPhones of the guys that go to lunch. And they're in a little cantina or a little, a little niner somewhere. And they end up getting hacked. And off goes the controls to some of the equipment, or more importantly, data. So it can be the low-hanging fruit that can actually help you the most over time. So we look here at the mean time. MTTI is mean time to identify. MTTC is mean time to contain. And so this is our AI portion actually, but days to contain and days to identify breaches from attacks, 221 to identify and 81 to contain. System glitch, think of these things. When we heard the government was hacked for 7 months before they realized OPM had lost all that data. When we go to relationships between mean time, the cost, and we know this from risk management, these are some of the risk management principles that apply. Whether it's work comp, whether it's cyber attack, or whether it's some other type of slip, trip, and fall. And I don't mean to trivialize any of this, but generally the quicker you find something out, the cheaper it is to close out. And with that, we're looking at the difference between 2017 and 2018. Higher fees over time. If we look at the days to identify and contain by root cause, so malicious criminal attacks take longer, malicious a little shorter, and human error 6 months to contain. Relationships. These between the mean time and average total cost. So the relationship measured in dollars for 2018. So it's more expensive over time to for the longer time that it takes. And this is just reiterating what we said really earlier. And then if we look at the state of security automation, so how many people are not in the AI today, but you can always catch that later. So AI, certainly fully deployed, only 15% of companies. And we'll talk about industries in just a little bit. So we'd love to see all this come over here in time. But with the new guidelines that NIST was talking about today. We also look at security automation decreases total cost of the loss. So again, automating that security, and as we said, the keynote said this morning too, the automated can do the deep dive where human eyes and need all the knowledge in the world. With humans, we can't do that layered deep dive, but the automated can. So let's look at the other thing happening, and we were a little surprised by this. Hispax is a London-based firm. Their U.S. operations are here in New York. And they have some pretty good, they were one of the early cybersecurity coverage firms, and they always had great policies. You can see that the larger entities are pretty well covered now. Many of you may work for larger entities, and they have shored up they batten down the hatches, if you will. But when we look here, it's smaller mid-sized firms that are more vulnerable, and that's who the bad guys are going after right now. So when we look at the vulnerabilities, we've got artificial intelligence certainly is an area that how many people have their little automated Amazon device or whatever. I try to go with what my cybersecurity researcher does, and that's maintain a very low profile, but still with the best of intentions, it's all out there. The Internet of Things, connecting the dots to every single thing that we own, more and more each day. And that can be a good thing in terms of life safety. There's a lot of potential there, saving costs in a lot of different areas, using less energy, but at the same time, it leaves us open to more vulnerabilities with more endpoints. And FBI has the stats on the endpoints coming in, over the next decade. Cybercrime certainly is not going away anytime soon. Mergers and acquisitions, how many of you are involved in those? So it's an extreme vulnerability, and we see that in operational risk, everything from claims to policies to coverage, who's going to cover what. I've seen in situations where some people were not necessarily, they were able to do some work outside federal guidelines, but if you bring them in-house, you suddenly have regulations that you might not have had before.
And the big one trying to do sensitive integration and create its own vulnerabilities.
And then supply chain, we've talked about, there are a few firms out there who will work with you if you set up your guidelines for appropriate insurance or appropriate supply chain criteria. They can help you do that sort of research. And it's, I've seen some of those companies are pretty well received.
Please, I just wanted to ask, how many of you are involved in mergers and acquisitions or supply chain vendor assessments?
I'm not involved directly, but yes.
Yeah.
So when you say they're vulnerable, do you suggest it's encrypted, it rested motion,
Well,
all the way through to?
Yeah, although I think understanding the architecture first is obviously the most important, and then figuring out how you're going to integrate that information. I know we got to the point where, once we acquired a company, we didn't integrate them into our network until our IT team would have a chance to actually go in and do an assessment of how secure their system was. Because what has happened in the past, particularly with mergers and acquisitions, is you get that connection and all of a sudden your system becomes
It's a very monolithic approach, because a lot of folks now look at mergers and acquisitions and say, hey, you're doing great. How can we help you? Stay and do what you're doing. Why do you need to be integrated? We'll help you and support you and take on that risk, but keep doing what you're doing.
And that's, so those are decisions that are taken in terms of how much risk you want to take, or how reliable is that, and then how do you still have to connect some of the data, obviously, any use point. But it's that integration through the supply chain, because even though they have a great internal system, they have touch points as well throughout their supply chain. And that's where the real vulnerabilities, at least in my experience, that we found it more on the vendor side.
Well, I just read something that in the last 2 years, when this was coming in, around 75% of hacks have gone to the 75.
I believe it. In higher ed, I would believe that absolutely.
If you have limited time, then you do a risk assessment of where you're going to get the best bang, to your point earlier, about where should we be spending our time, and understanding how much information you have and where you don't have information.
With the Marriott Starwood version, they knowingly, the Starwood had unfortunately fairly bad reputations before the merger, where the board of Marriott basically were picking the poke, and now they're, I don't know what the current status is, but I assume that there's litigation against the officers and directors of Marriott. Children's
That's a great example.
There is, yes.
The same thing with Yahoo Verizon.
Yes.
Both of the breaches that Yahoo begrudgingly disclosed could have killed that deal. Verizon locked off, well, the industry with the street office, much less than they actually were. They could have gutted that entire deal and told Yahoo we're buying for $1.
No, you pay us to pay.
Exactly.
Because that's what's going to wind up in the end.
Well, but that makes for M&A so important, is that the ducks in a row have to be proved. Otherwise, you're going to get shareholder derivative actions, left, right, and center.
But, and I love this
About the
conversation.
regulators.
But what if this conversation occurred before the deal was done? And
That's what it was supposed to be.
advising the attorneys, and I don't know in the specific cases, but were the risk managers and the security people involved in the conversation more than let's look at the claims?
The problem is that it's driven by attestations. That's the problem, is that they're accepting the representations. And
Yes.
anybody who's more than 5 years old will know they do a trust and verify.
There you go, there you go. And that becomes part of the M&A process, is all I'm saying.
The problem I see is that the lawyers on both sides do not do trust and verify. I have had conversations with one vendor last year.
We say it's not my job.
No,
No.
the vendor doesn't read the vendor's personnel of claim, never send the additional schedules that deal with security requirements, minimal security requirements for the vendor to the people who actually are going to be able to implement them.
Really?
And you know,
No
the
one's
other
traffic
thing,
calming that?
the other.
It's not our responsibility as the person who's acquiring the service of a third party internally who knows how to do that.
The other piece
It's in
of
the
it,
contract, perfectly clear.
piece of it is, oh, I'm sure we have insurance for that, right? I'm sure we have insurance for that, so we'll go ahead and take the risk with that.
Well, frankly, I think those attorneys should be ignored.
The underwriters
There's competence.
For malpractice.
For malpractice.
underwriters are getting everything within 2 days and expected to, produce a premium within.
Well, you can't
hundreds of thousands of dollars.
do a significant merger in 30 days. It's just not possible to
But
do
the
it.
insurance is coming at the very tail end after all of it.
Well, insurance will sometimes cover it, but if it's fraud,
Not if it's a willful act.
Yeah.
it's the insurance are going to try to get out of it.
Yeah.
Say, you knew and you didn't notify.
But the risk
You
is
disclosed.
litigation
And you will.
or relying on
Well, that's different.
attestations and the financial performance of who you're acquiring or who's making those attestations. Can they live up to those agreements on the sharing of liability?
I'd
So,
love to take questions. Can we wait till we get through this?
Let's have a comment actually, just for your slides, a suggestion if you go back. I know we're focused on M&A here, but we forget divestitures, which is a big thing
Yes.
that goes on. And I think people forget the fact that you've got legal requirements, even if you exit a business as part of the service, you gotta retain the data. And God forbid you lose that data, it's still liable, no matter if you exit the business. So something you might want to put on your slide there, just to that speak.
Books and records violation is the least of the concerns of those perishing.
Thank you. Did you want?
So just a comment, based on a properly done merger and acquisition, that's another line of insurance business. Because if it's
Yes.
not done, it could be rolled back
yes.
and the insurance would cover it and the premium would make the whole thing go around. That's something beautiful.
That is true, but I will tell you, having been involved in M&As, at least in my experience, the executives say, we don't need that, we're going to rely on the attestations.
But that-
I see
it would
very
be
few.
pushed.
It's there, it's available. I agree with you, it's
Push.
available.
Yeah.
That's the friction point, though, for later. I don't want to, I know you're tight on time, but it's really getting so that the executives will engage and figuring out. Someone said it before, figuring out how to articulate it and what's going to resonate.
Absolutely.
What do they see as their
But
issues?
it becomes a risk decision, right? They want that protection. You may think it's the most wonderful thing in the world to buy insurance or something, and they say, based on the financials of this merger and acquisition, if we do that, it kills the deal. So there are decisions, and that's all we're trying to do is inform them. To your point, is having that conversation. Our experience, and I don't want to speak for Alan, but our experience is those conversations aren't necessarily occurring at the right point with the right
You
people.
build it into the cost where it's a win-win regardless, so there can't be any pushback on it.
Sometimes,
It's very difficult market right now. That's another conversation. 2 seconds. Did you have a quick?
Yeah, well, just on the mergers and acquisitions insurance, reps and warranties coverage, generally is 5 to 10% of the size of the deal. So if the deal never should have taken place, your insurance would only pay 5 to 10%. That's the amount that they cap cover on. So in no way.
And insurance is not a cover for that decision.
Right.
All right, let's keep going, and then we'll be glad to stick around afterwards.
So I just wanted, Ellen put the slide in, and we just actually published about cyber coverage. A lot of organizations say, oh, we already have that covered, it's in our product liability, or it's in our D&O, or it's in, there's policies don't say whether or not it's covered. One of the things we're advocating, and the insurers are beginning to do it, is affirmative cover or saying no, we're not. There's a case right now out there where an insurance company denied cyber coverage because of war risk exclusion, because their interpretation of war risk exclusion is that if it came from a bad actor in one of these adverse countries, then that is a war, that's a statement of war, and it's being fought in there right now. My advice to anyone is understand what you have and what you don't have, and if your risk management professionals are uncomfortable, get a coverage expert to look at that. I will say buying affirmative coverage where you know exactly what is being covered, whether it's liability or your own assets, and what the exclusions are really important. We always work with our legal team to look at our cyber coverage. We want it early on.
We have about 4 minutes. So.
To that point briefly, some of the cyber risk policies are facilitative. And if you've gone to the cloud, you are now essentially without any coverage. Your coverage doesn't apply.
True. And that's why you should have that conversation.
My policy was a commercial liability with cyber attack. Right now, especially cyber.
And even some of the coverages here have changed.
And just a shameless plug, in a few minutes, Alyssa and I are going to be talking about cyber insurance. And we want
Any thoughts about how the EU GDPR affects trend? Or can I save it for that?
Yeah, we'll hold the rest of our questions.
That's always for you.
Let's get to the part. This is great. This is a great group. Let's go ahead and get to this part because I think this is really the crux of why you're here. Yeah. So when you're working, and how I've worked with groups to implement, whether it's business continuity, which then turned into resilience and crisis management to encompass all of the pre-incident and post-incident activity, whether it's working with IT on different exercises and trainings, all this comes together with your partners as your entity. And if you're working well together before that M&A, you'll probably be working well together through the M&A. It's usually headed up by a VP level person. So risk and IT work together closely. We also bring in legal to the group. The operations and security, law enforcement should always be included. If you have law enforcement in your organization, they should always be included in a cyber risk incident. They'll be working with FBI, you'll be working with FBI, but they should always be a part of that. And then exercises and practice. I've seen where, again on cyber or facilities, where people think they will go manage this through completion and actually get to a point where they can't go any further because they don't have the legal or the insurance background. So having an exercise can really bring that to speed, and possibly even with M&As, if you do that all the time in your work, having an exercise can help bring value to why people need to work together ahead of time. If you're going to have some sort of strategic risk management program, it works like this. Start with a steering committee, high level, approved by the board, the president, and also your senior VP. Have a champion who will work with you, and make it small. It doesn't have to be 20, 30 people. And this program, I can tell you, is scalable between $500,000 or $500 million company and even smaller. and also to a $12 billion company defense contractor. Survey the risks, so you have a survey with your group, and this is more for the broader risk management. You can also narrow this down to IT security as well. Have a survey. You don't need 2,000 responses. It's something in the neighborhood of 200 to 300, maybe 500, depending on the size. 200 or 300 works at all levels. Analyze the data to prioritize. And when you're asking the questions, you ask it in such a manner that you get the metrics you need to be able to analyze and prioritize. Select 10 risks. There may be 50 or 100, but select 10, make it manageable. Identify 3 that you really want to go for. Bring that to your board, get their buy-in. They will appreciate only seeing 3 things instead of 153 things, and they'll be more engaged with it. And then come back to them. Whether it's 6 months or a year later, they'll come back. You'll come back, and the owners of those critical processes that you identified will present to the board. And they love doing it. But they do the deep dive. So whether it's within your cybersecurity framework or whether it's in the overarching framework for the entity, you can do this in a measured approach. And then if you have 10 identified, narrow it down to 3. It can be 2 and 8, whatever works for your entity. Narrow it down and then bring that back to the board. And then put a placeholder on those, monitor those, don't let them get away, and then keep working through your top 10, or be flexible. That's one thing we've heard. And I always say here, it's customized to you, and be flexible. If something new comes into play, then you need to address that as well. With that timeline for something like this would be 4 to 6 months. And you can have your first report within a year.
This is also, you may find that things are changing. We talked earlier about how the organization changes. We like to think about IT as a business enabler. It's a horizontal competency. It's not just the hardware, the firmware, the middleware, the software. It's really a competency within the organization and everyone understanding how that piece of the organization is working to deliver the mission. Okay.
So from there, if your board sees you working together and you bring an integrated approach to the board, you'll be able to raise that awareness and obtain the resources you need for the things that you need to do. We've always started with a champion of the board level. You can demonstrate your control factors, share benchmarking with industry if you need to, and anticipate. Always anticipate what could go wrong next, and build processes to help thwart those issues. Partner. Here's some of the people you can partner with. Pick and choose what works for your entity. I would keep the group smaller rather than larger. I've worked with 4 to 6 people on a team, and it works very smoothly. The same with the data. You can have 2,000 items or 200. There's probably a variance of 0.5% between what you're going to get in return if you're asking the right people the right questions. Utilize your external sources. I chaired a security council for DHS Safety Act while I was at SMU and learned a great deal from our federal authorities with FBI, DHS, and Secret Service. Utilize them. Utilize your insurance brokers, insurers, and REMs. Obviously, I've got a lot of expertise in their stations. Engage your staff. Again, we go back to the people, and while we're looking at hardware and malware and all of these other things coming into play, it's people at the end of the day that I always like to say, if you embed a risk culture, you'll have a greater confidence of protecting your entity, and that starts with the people. And so the more you educate them, then you have 1,000 risk managers out on the floor, and not just you, or not just 30 or 50 people. It cannot be done in a vacuum, and a risk culture starts with a vision, consistent nomenclature, and a plan so people can see what it looks like. I like to start with, here's what a year's worth of activity looks like. Resources, we've got a lot of them here today.
We'll make copies of these slides, so we're not going to go through each one, but we'll move from.
and I think we're there. So
hopefully you found today's talk and conversation to be beneficial. Because of the time, we've got a little bit of a transition here, and hopefully we set the stage for you to speak about Insurance Day, because there's a lot going on in that area. So thank you.
Thank you.
So, as I said, cyber insurance has been around pretty much since the late 90s. It kind of came about in response, it grew out of technology, policy. Many people thought, it's cyber, it just has to do with technology. It's kind of a completely separate coverages, but typically what you see is that you do find the cyber coverage on a tech, blended form. And here we're going to walk through the different types of coverages, but as I said, it came about in the late 90s. Everybody was kind of really worried, okay, Y2K, what's going to happen in 2000? It sounds really silly now, but at the time it was, our computers obviously. So anyway, these are the coverages. And basically, a lot of carriers are in the space right now. I'd like to say, we're one of the top 3. There's probably about 10 primary carriers. Really important when you're going to purchase the insurance to make sure that the carrier that you're going to place your business with has a dedicated claims team. That's one of the most important things. A lot of new entrants in the market. I think there's about 140 cyber carriers right now, but really only a handful that really that you want to place a primary policy with. So the coverages are broken down into first party or reimbursement coverages and third party, which are the liability coverages. And so for anybody that has the insurance, you may hopefully you haven't had to use it yet. If you have, that the first thing that's going to happen is typically you're going to realize you've been the victim of some sort of incident. Obviously, it's unfortunately not usually self-discovery, but you're going to find out from a client, from a vendor, from an employee, or worst case from a hacker, or from regulatory inquiry. And basically, at that point, you're going to ideally contact your insurance carrier. We have a dedicated 800 number where you call in. Many of our competitors have something similar. You call in, and at that point, you're going to figure out what is the immediate thing that you need to do. And immediately, privacy counsel will be retained, and this is done so that even if there isn't potentially a notification obligation, that they can retain a forensics firm, and it's done so under privilege. And 99% of the time, you need that forensics firm to come in. Someone like Billy and his company and figure out, okay, exactly what happened, and really can speak to the very specifics of the investigation and kind of how it goes. But that's the first thing that's going to happen. So the policy is going to respond. Get you that privacy counsel. That's under this crisis management. You're going to have privacy counsel, potential notification obligations if individuals' information is compromised. We now have 50. Every state in the U.S. has a notification obligation, and some are extremely onerous in terms of how soon you need to notify the individual. It's not exactly where the breach occurs. So the breach occurs in New York, but you're holding information of individuals in 20 different states. You need to notify those individuals in their home state. So we joke in some of the really large litigated class actions, but stamps alone cost millions and millions of dollars. So notification obligation is pretty important. Of course, typically with that goes credit monitoring, forensic investigation, and in the larger scale breaches you see, there is the need to retain a public relations firm. The public relations firm we've seen, a lot of times it's really important. So Target did a really bad job of this, of getting out, really making sure that until you know the facts, don't get out and put the message out. The best thing that customers want to know for large publicly traded companies is what happened, what are you doing, what are you going to do to make me whole again. So until you actually know the facts, you realize that lessons learned is really not good to just get out there and say, okay, we think this is what happened. The coverages have evolved so that you don't just have those first party data recovery. A lot of times we see ransomware. We're seeing a ton of ransomware. Our most recent demand, the highest one was over $60 million. These started years ago as 50,000. It was cyber extortion. Threatening, we're going to hold your network at ransom if you don't pay us 50,000. But now we're seeing that these really overnight are on a Friday night coming in. We have them 2 weeks ago for $16 million demand. We were able to talk them down. But the key thing here is partnering with the insurance company, because a lot of times with ransomware, the payment is demanded in Bitcoin, as most of you I'm sure know it. SRM is one of the companies that we work with that has a Bitcoin wallet. Some of our industries, some of our insurers we've seen are a little more prepared than others. Unfortunately, it tends to be the more regulated industries that are a little more sophisticated. I hate to say that, but we've had a lot of not ideal situations with municipalities where they really don't know what to do, and unfortunately they don't have the budget to dedicate to have the decision makers in place ahead of time. And what we did see, we had an incident a few months ago where somebody called on Friday night, so it was Friday night, called our claims hotline. It was, the person from the municipality somewhere out, let's stay with them. They called and said, okay, I'm about to go negotiate $200,000 in Bitcoin in the parking lot. Is this something you guys are going to pay for? And this really happened. And we were like, hold up, what you have. Let us get our forensics and get involved and figure out what to do. But a lot of times, some of the entities really just don't know what they should be doing. So that's kind of touching on cyber extortion and ransomware, where we do actually cover the Bitcoin payment. And the data recovery is important. That's only good if your back is really good. And Billy can speak to this better than you, but a lot of times what we're seeing with more regulated industries is, yes, they have really good backups. They may be recoverable, but 9 times out of 10 we're finding that for the lesser sophisticated, they do have to pay the ransomware because they really do need the decryption fees back to pay for.
A quick question on the business interruption system failure.
Yeah.
What if they voluntarily shut down part or all of the system in order to prevent the spread of a virus or what have you, malware? Does that trigger the business interruption?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it's an endorsement that we just created. So yes, it's a newly created coverage where it makes more sense financially from us, obviously on the insurance side, as well as you on the insurance side, that if that's what you need to do, then absolutely that is covered. The key, the question that comes in is who's the one to make that decision? Is it the CISO? Is it the chief financial officer? And so we've kind of, expanded it to be the person who is authorized to make that decision. So it's kind of, it's a newly created endorsement, but yes. And that's a good segue into business interruption, which very analogous to on a property policy. The difference here is it's not going to be a property-related peril, it's going to be a network peril, a denial of service attack, malware, something that shuts the network down that makes you inoperable. The other thing that's gotten a little more attenuated from the core coverages that we've seen is dependent business interruption. And there was a comment earlier about if you outsource to the cloud, you're not going to be covered. That's actually not true. You can put all your information in the cloud. It's still your network definition of the policy is really broad. So it's your network or it's anything that's connected to your network. So if you're a cloud provider or critical service provider, for example, if you're a retailer and your payment processor goes down and you can't operate the policy after a waiting period, would you be take back?
So it's important to highlight that you're referring to your policy form. All policy forms are different, so not everyone's policy extends to provide coverage.
Right.
So just from a general statement standpoint, be careful of referring to information.
Yeah, that is true. I would say that the coverages are, it's a competitive market right now. Honestly, so it's, more and more carriers are providing that coverage. It used to be an additional premium, but it's really not anymore. And it's, from an underwriting perspective, it's very difficult to underwrite to because we're underwriting to the applicant themselves and the insurer. We don't necessarily know how secure your third-party vendor is, but typically we see this with much larger cloud service providers or payment processors or retailers or claims adjudication things that have systems for healthcare and entities. So it's typically those.
It does bring up a broader point of mine. Thank you very much for throwing that on the table. It's really, really important to know your policy, closely with your broker to understand what's covered and what isn't. In the last presentation, there was an article passed out from a journal, a few copies left in the room, and it goes to great lengths to understand what some of the differences in policy coverage are and how key that is. Yes, thank you for the risk management.
It's downloadable from the magazine.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Yes, Bill.
I'm going to argue that this industry is not as mature as, let's say, auto liability or fire or any of those things. And that as a consequence of that, it's if you're going to buy auto insurance, you can go to Geico. But if you're going to buy cyber insurance of any kind, you really better go through a broker. Because you simply can't have the expertise to know what coverage you are really buying and whether or not the kinds of questions that are being raised here are going to be answered favorably to you at the time when you get ready to file a claim. One other point I would make is that filing claims in this space knowing what damage you have really suffered is difficult. And your normal accounting system doesn't collect the right information for you. In a crisis situation, your accounting system is almost useless to you. So it's useful to have somebody help you with that claim.
I think two comments there, and I'm really to touch on the forensic accounting component of it, but the policy does, you will get, we have a dedicated claims team. The claims person will work with you to try and quantify what that lost revenue is based on, what were your sales last year, what are they this year, what could you have made up in that downtime, did you make up for it in some other way, but it's really going to come down to forensic accounting, and our policy does provide for forensic accounting of the insured's choice. So it's a mutual selection of a forensic accountant that will help you figure out and quantify what that loss is.
That's a great point.
Yeah. So anyway, those are, I guess that's pretty much all of the first party coverages. One other more attenuated coverage related to business interruption is system failure. And that's also something that typically or historically was more of a additional premium type charge. And we say it's also called administrative error. It's basically somebody comes in at night, cleaning crew, pulls the plug on your one server, which we hope is not any of our insureds, but you go down because of any reason, the policy will get you back up and running. And just one other point to the business interruption on a cyber versus a property policy, the waiting periods on a property policy are typically 24 to 48 hours, and on the cyber policy, they're much lower. They're typically 8 to 10, 12 hours, but 8 is definitely on the lower end depending on the industry that we're seeing.
I think we might have a question for the gentleman here.
Kind of that is that. Are there situations where there's a gap based on an act where, yes, your network is compromised, but also they compromise the system where your property is damaged? Is there a gap from, let's say, a policy that you're giving to the property policy where there's a fine line to say, oh, that's not covered?
Yeah, that's another really good point, because we also have an endorsement relative to that. So a lot of times there will be an overlap and there will be a gap. And so the best thing is obviously to have your broker identify what those gaps might be. But it is addressed under our policy where we have an endorsement. It's called the overlapping property. It's called the overlapping property coverage endorsement. So within 24 hours, like FM Global, for example, is one of the property policies that provides a lot of cyber coverage. So typically what will happen is you can elect within that 24 hours or within even a few weeks who you want to pay first. And the insured has that option to do based on who they think is going to, typically the cyber policy is going to have lower retentions in terms of dollars and in terms of waiting periods, but the cyber policy is not going to cover property damage, no matter what. It's not going to cover bodily injury or property damage. It's only going to cover, the monetary damages, or the damage to your network. But again, not the resulting physical damage. So the property policy would provide the physical damage cover, whereas the cyber policy is not going to provide that. So kind of.
Do you want to comment on Burking?
Oh yeah, good.
Your form of kind of gap insurance, kind of, with how you all went to that point, or you kind of act it out?
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
So you have your policy can actually cover and the gap, close the gap is not, or shorten the gap is not fully closed. It's a situation where it's network and physical point.
Yeah, so there would, yes, arguably there will be a gap. And I would leave it to your broker because I can speak 100% to what the cyber policy covers, but the property policies are evolving more and more too, so that you don't have that type of situation. And I would say that a really good broker would be able to craft a situation so that you don't have that. But a lot of what we're seeing now, unfortunately, is malicious actors who are just blowing things up because they can. And many of you may know back in 2014, there was the German steel mill explosion. That was just an example of somebody hacking in through the corporate email that should never have been able to access the industrial control systems, and was because of lack of, Billy knows better than me, but lack of data segregation or, that type of information. But yeah, so those are all of those coverages. And then touching on the liability coverages, worst case, you have a really big type of incident, and you have, typically we see this in the form of class action litigation, where you're going to have, some liability, and that's where you'll need to obviously retain a law firm that's going to do the litigation. And we also see a lot of inquiries with the different regulatory bodies that are coming in and asking questions. And the policy does provide for that coverage for the fines and penalties
where insurable by law. And this is a really big issue now with GDPR, because we're getting that question all the time in terms of where, we know most countries right now are claiming that, most countries in the EU are saying that the fines and penalties are not insurable. That remains to be seen with a lot of the fines that we've seen. We'll see, under an insurance policy, how that will, ultimately be tested and, bring to bear. One other comment had Billy brought up earlier with respect to property damage. It's another endorsement that we have. It's called bricking coverage. So essentially what happens is if your software cannot be brought back up because it's not recoverable, or the any information, I'm saying software firmware, in that type of situation, we'll pay for the physical replacement of the hardware. So if it doesn't make sense because you can't bring anything back up, you'll get the cost to actually replace the device itself.
Are you looking to cover any GDPR penalties by perhaps?
That is something that's debatable. I mean, kind of like a puny rep out of Bermuda. Yeah, I did see a yeah. I did see I read a form recently in that I think the whole issue there, and some of you may know this a lot better than me, is just how you repatriate the funds. I mean, I know that's always what it comes down to. So that's all of the insurance.
Yeah, so this slide is the sort of the heart of our presentation. I guess there's two main takeaways that it offered. One is a lot of things are being covered. Two is it's really complicated, right? So, I mean, it used to just start here,
Billy's
right? And now there's a whole lot more, which makes this one more important because you can transfer a lot more risk, but it's also a lot more important to understand how this works and work closely with your broker and your risk manager to figure out what your needs are and how to cover them.
So this is just a really quick, it's a handout that we have. This is kind of just a claims roadmap that we have, and it basically just, if you have the insurance, or even if you don't, but kind of steps that you should take. And one of the first steps is obviously to, you realize you've been the victim of some sort of incident, you contact, your internal team, you call into our hotline, or you call your privacy attorney. Ideally, you have a business continuity plan in place and you have these steps prepared ahead of time. So that's, figuring out, okay, what do we think? What do we know? And then at that point, call the claims team, you're going to leave a voicemail. And at that point, you're going to engage with privacy counsel, as I said, who would then retain any additional vendors so that it can be done under privilege. That's a quick one. So this is a lot of information on this slide, but basically this is the underwriting process. We get a lot of questions of how we underwrite cyber insurance because clearly it's not property or auto insurance. So we do have a physical paper application that's about 12 questions, but it's not just for not the much larger, but for most companies now, it's not a physical application. It's really a phone call with the CISO. The broker typically will orchestrate this with whatever insurers want to be on the risk. If it's a new risk or even a renewal, typically you're going to want to have a phone call with the CISO to ask all these questions about their security controls and procedures and really get a level of comfort with them. And one of Billy's coworkers is, a lot of times on our calls so that he can ask them more technical questions, and we really can gain a level of comfort with that insured and, in determining if we're going to underwrite it or not. Did you have a question?
So actually, just following up on that, just recently Marsh has come out with, and actually was part of the evaluated team, 17 technologies and services, if you will, products and services that they're saying are now
Catalyst. It's the cyber catalyst.
Catalyst.
I know.
Exactly.
Yep.
So is that an effort by insurance companies to reduce premiums, to give more favorable terms if you're using those? What is that?
It's
that is a great question.
I'm going to answer that very.
That's the way I'm reading it.
I'm going to answer very diplomatically. It is. I get this. I've been getting this question for years. I used to work at Marsh, so I'm familiar with the broker side, and a lot of brokers are constantly coming out with new products and ways to incentivize insureds to be better risks, and obviously more to push the insurers to offer discounted premiums and more favorable terms. I will say, it's not so much leading to less payment of premium. I will say very slightly improved terms. I don't see that there's a huge benefit. I mean, yes, we like to know that they're working with some of these vendors and they're great. And Marsh has an attestation that goes with that that offering to say that, yes, they're using them in conformance with the guidelines that have been established. So yes, it helps, but I always get asked that question. Oh, if this security, top security company says I'm, this and I'm the best, I'm like, that's great, but if you're not, we're just not going to give you insurance. So, it's kind of, yes, you want them to be as good as possible, and there's a little bit of an incentive, but I wouldn't say that there's not a huge correlation.
So what's the point of it then? Because 17 vendors, one of which just hit us the other day with this, hey, we're now on this preferred list.
They were approved and they were vetted, and Billy's colleague actually was on all of the, what?
What's the benefit to the consumer that they're on this list now?
They can say they've been pre-approved by eight of the largest insurance carriers and vetted, and they have great security, a great security offering. There's a lot of, I will say there was a lot of competition for the Catalyst. There were hundreds, if not, there were hundreds of applicants that went through it, and only 17 were selected. So they all have great offerings. There are also other companies that have great offerings. So they're just, they were Marsh approved. And then that is, yeah. Would you have a question?
I'm hoping so. No. All right, cool. And I see a few of you taking pictures of the slides. I know they're that good. If you just hand me your card afterwards, I'll email them to you. I won't spam you with anything else. Okay.
But yeah, so there are a lot of these questions that we're going to ask about. It basically starts with the industry that a company is in. What is their industry? What is their revenue? What type of records are they holding? How many records are they holding? And that's kind of how we start with rating a company and kind of what we think the underlying risk is. And then, of course, really, the security controls and procedures. And frankly, we've been on calls with some insureds who are applying for business interruption insurance, and you'll ask them, do you have a business continuity plan? And they will actually say no. And we're like, oh, well, then you're not going to get that coverage. But a lot of times we're on these calls and it's a little bit disconcerting that they're not as prepared as you would like them to be. And then, of course, do they do, is there privacy awareness training? That's something that we also offer in conjunction with our policy. There's a number of resources that we'll get to later. And then, of course, the number and type of devices, how secure they are. Are they using, end-to-end encryption? Like some of the most basic things we've seen with some of the municipalities. I don't want to call out the city of Baltimore, but we all know what happened. And they actually, they did just procure cybersecurity insurance for the first time, not through us, but they did get it through a very large carrier. But it was interesting being on those underwriting calls because on that call, my coworker was on it and I sit next to him and I overheard a lot of the conversation. And, they said, well, have you now encrypted all of your devices? And this was the actual answer. No, but it's in plan. It's in scope for 2021. So it's kind of like, you'd think, and they chose, we all know, to wait as long as possible to not pay the ransomware using taxpayer dollars. And so you see, depending on the industry, people take different approaches. And sometimes the security is really not even at the most basic of what we like to see. This was a study that we looked at. It was a Spiceworks study, polled 581 IT professionals throughout North America and Europe, and these were common areas of coverage that we saw. So a lot of times if they were implicated and they had insurance, these were some of what we saw. We saw damage to reputation was 35%. That is also covered under a cyber policy. We do have an endorsement, consequential reputational harm. That is arguably a business interruption exposure as well, but there is the coverage for it, and it operates similar to business interruption after a waiting period where you can value 6 months down the line what potentially your lost revenue reputation was. I will say we have not seen any claims in that regard, and I do envision it would be difficult to quantify, but the coverage is available. Notification costs being almost 50%, cyber extortion, ransomware, loss of income, legal costs, obviously discovering what you need, the law firms coming in, figuring out what your notification obligations are or litigation, of course, loss or damage to data being the largest, and then liability being one of the largest components to a third party. Sorry.
With respect to coverage for damage to reputation, is there any consideration for capitalization stock coverage?
Yeah, I think, we've seen, it's of the larger publicly traded companies that we've seen over the last few years that have suffered an incident, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I know that with almost all of them, the stock came back up. So I don't think that we've actually seen that there really was any lost revenue or lost damage to brand devaluation. I know Target was a perfect example of that. Yahoo was another one, Equifax. There were 5 or 6. Yahoo was the big one. Right, I mean, yeah. What
went through was based on a significantly lower valuation, otherwise that was $1 billion loss.
Right, so I think that was one of the outliers because the other few, I think, and you may know this better than me, I know that the stocks came back. So it wasn't like we actually saw that there was a huge damage because of what happened.
I had a conversation actually recently about that. So Target was one, Home Depot was one.
Yep.
Their stocks went down significantly.
But they came back up.
But they did come back
Yep.
up. The argument was, if they didn't go down, where would they be today?
Right.
So it's the residual loss that we're talking about, not the current loss.
Yeah.
Coverage?
Well,
there is a large reputational risk product, but what that covers is the response related to the reputational threat. So it doesn't cover the change in stock price or the counterfactual, what might it have been. What it covers is a whole team of responders, lawyers, public affairs people to help the organization manage through that. I would offer a company like Boeing may have benefited from a little bit more help around that reputational impact, right? Distinct from cyber, right? So there are products like that, and that's really what this coverage offers. Yes, Bill.
My colleague Brian Honan has been very critical of the industry for paying extortion.
Yeah.
And he's even gone so far as to argue that if you have ransomware insurance, you are more likely to be hit by ransomware than
it's
if you
true.
don't.
It's true, unfortunately.
Public, definitely.
But then, of course, it has to be reported in your.
Just about everybody has it when they're going to put it on. Because they have it, they can't.
Right.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said that nobody makes it public, then they have to cover.
Right.
So the bad actors will have no knowledge as to whether it exists.
Well,
most firms will have some.
Don't bet on that.
But it's reported in their 10K.
Before an actual, I'm a little bit gasping at where one would find public information as to whether a company had malware coverage. If they're publicly traded, they mention whether they have cyber coverage.
Right.
Ransomware is a big industry with lots of people, and so far, hardly anybody has been identified or prosecuted.
Carrying coverage to protect yourself against ransomware is not public information.
It is in government. It is in government. Because governments, all that is public information. Yes, I have made a purchase. That's public information. And governments are, especially smaller municipal governments that don't have the resources, are primary targets.
So,
If we look at non-governmental entities, kidnapping ransom insurance has been around for many, many decades.
Yep.
And companies and insurance carriers are very, very protective of that information as to whether or not, for exactly the reasons that you're pointing out, as to whether or not it is.
there are definitely some tough issues related to payments of ransomware, right? That's an interesting conversation to pursue. I do agree in full that the data around this is hard to find, and I don't think there's ever been a compelling study around insurance contributing to coverage. Now the reality is, as coverage has become much broader across the market, the odds of any company having coverage and being hit by ransomware are increasing, right? Just more and more companies have coverage, therefore more and more companies that are attacked by ransomware hackers have that coverage. And then just to follow up on your point about public governments, and there are some 10K filings that disclose this. I think companies are quickly trying to erase that stuff. Given how confusing coverage can be, I don't think even a public purchase, it might say that this much money was for insurance, but figuring out exactly what's covered and not, and whether ransomware coverage is part of that, I don't really think factors into the equation of the threat actor's mind.
Well, Mr. Murray might agree or disagree with my opinion, but I don't think they're looking that deep.
That's my point.
I think they're looking at the fact that you got insurance, let's test it.
Good.
So these are just some points to check when purchasing insurance. A lot of times the policy functions where the first party coverages are discovery based and the liability coverages are claims made and reported as they are on many other liability coverages. And one of the key things just to keep in mind is years ago there were carriers that would say, okay, you discovered your policy incepted January 1st, you discovered the breach January 5th, but the forensic investigation shows that it goes back 2 years ago. We're not paying, we're not covering it. And there are some carriers that will still take that approach and actually ask you to reimburse them for the forensics that goes into that. But we do not take that approach, and any major carrier right now in the primary space would not take that approach. But just important to note that there is retroactive coverage for discovery-based incidents that might go back, obviously, before you knew they existed. Negligence. The important thing with a cyber policy, and I hate hearing that cyber policies don't pay claims because I think of any other line of insurance, cyber pays the most claims proportionate-wise. It does not take negligence. We actually cover intentional acts of rogue employees so long as they're not in the C-suite. So it's a very broad coverage. It's not negligence-based. So some of these, another thing to look out for, you want to be careful that they're not negligence-based, that there wasn't, some type of issue that happened there where they have to argue that there was an error or omission in their professional services or something of that nature. Social engineering, also another coverage. We do cover typically a crime coverage. We do have an endorsement for social engineering financial fraud. We will cover up to 250 or 500,000 sublimit at the most, typically on a $10 million policy. So it's a small sublimit with the thought being it really is a crime coverage. But again, just to know that so long as, I won't get into the specifics of the endorsement, but so long as there is a verification process that's followed in terms of a callback procedure, the insurance would respond to pay you that sublimit for whatever is lost. And then of course, terrorism, I think we saw this with Mondelez, and that's a slide we have, but I know you guys talked about it earlier, and we'll just make it abundantly clear it was a property policy, not a cyber policy, and I can't stand when people say, oh, it's, cyber, it has nothing to do with cyber.
In that article does a nice job addressing that.
So that's, and this is where we talk about Mondelez, and I know you guys talked about it earlier, so I don't know that we...
Yeah, we'll just have 1 minute left.
One other quick point, cottage health. I know you guys also I think you touched on this in terms of what's not covered. I get this question all the time. If I fill out an application and I say that we have a patch management scheme that works every night, and all of a sudden one night it doesn't work, are you going to deny my claim? And the answer is no. And if we functioned like the company that insured cottage health, we would not be in business, because it has to be, obviously you're filling out an application, there's a warranty, unless it is a really big material deviation from something that's on that application, and almost to the point where you can show as intentional fraud, the claim is not going to be denied. I mean, it has to be a really big deviation, not a one-off that something didn't happen, because I do get that question a lot.
Finally.
Yeah. Cyber insurance is not an excuse just because you have the insurance.
All right, so to wrap up, I'm so glad I asked Alyssa to go
No, we didn't even get
first.
to your
Because I'm going to, while you all go to lunch, I'm going to brief my 10 slides. They're an empty room, crying a little bit. But thanks so much for all the questions.
Yeah.
Great job, Alyssa. Really appreciate
thanks.
it. And we'll be here if there are other... you can tell a lot of people in this room know a lot about this stuff.
Yeah.
So we certainly welcome
We'll
the
share the
discussion.
slides too. You can see them. Okay, so welcome everyone. This is the Gloom to Boom, Transforming Cyber Risk into Cyber Resilience and Value session. Thank you for coming. So in this session, I'm going to try to sort of paint a big picture to begin with, and then sort of go more and more into the whole cyber world and how people working on cyber issues, whether you're technologists, lawyers, auditors, business people, how you can make the most of it in terms of building resilience for your organization, as well as creating value for your shareholders and stakeholders. So the purpose, I always like to start with a bit of a purpose statement, because it's important to understand what we're trying to focus on. So this is what I submitted to the New York City Metro joint conference. And so this is, I want to give you what I'm going to be talking about, which is really emphasizing the importance of cross-disciplinary collaboration in all things cyber. That means cyber risk management, cybersecurity, technology, resilience building, oversight, all things cyber in a context of the ESG and T, which is what I sort of put technology issues into this bigger bucket of ESG and T. How many people are familiar with the ESG nomenclature that's out there? So it's a financial term that investors are using more and more to look at companies to decide whether or not they have good environmental, social, and governance standards and practices. And so in my book, Gloom to Boom, I've added T for technology because these are all the issues, the non-financial issues that have potentially major financial impacts and reputational impacts. And cyber is part of that overall picture. So I want to sort of talk about it from that context because you're not sort of an isolated issue or team. You're people who are working with many others to accomplish the purposes of your organization. So that is the big picture. And some of the takeaways or things that I want to present for you today is this framework that I talked about, the ESG and T framework, the big picture of how you build that risk management and resilience in your organization, how cyber forms part of that ESG and T big picture, and then give you some ideas, some tools, some takeaways to take home, to take back to your companies, your organizations, to maybe start doing more of that cross-disciplinary collaboration that will help your organizations.
Question.
Yes, please.
Will we get the slides?
I don't know what the...
You're willing to share them?
Yeah, I'm happy to share them. Well, yeah. Okay, so overview of today, we're going to start with sort of the very big picture, which is the context. And again, I'm basing this on a book that I just wrote that's coming out in 3 weeks. It's going to be raffled off later on to a couple of people. In this book, I call it Gloom to Boom, How Leaders Transform Risk into Resilience and Value. And cyber is part of that big picture of ESG and T risks and opportunities and potential value creation. Then we're going to talk about how cyber governance and oversight, meaning the role of your board of directors or your oversight body, the importance of being able to connect to them in order to be able to do your work, whatever that might be, if you're a lawyer, if you're a technologist, if you're something else, in terms of cyber resilience building. The cross-disciplinary teams is another key part of what we're going to talk about. Achieving cyber resilience, I have a model that I've created of 8 elements of resilience generally, and there's a cyber role in each of those. And then finally, there are some really good examples, and I'm sure many more that I don't know about, of how this resilience building actually creates new and great value for your shareholders and stakeholders. So let's get started with the very big picture. The very big picture, I call it the 10 megatrends of our turbulent times. And that's part of sort of the context of where we're living today. And cyber is one of the bleeding edge issues, clearly. All the technological change that's taking place is clearly setting a very different tone than maybe 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. So I have 10 megatrends. I'll just talk about them very briefly just to sort of set the stage. The fourth industrial revolution, how many of you have heard of that concept? Many of you, I'm sure. It's a World Economic Forum concept that basically says we are now entering or have entered a fourth industrial revolution. We had one a century for the last 3 centuries, and now we're sort of hurtling quickly into a fourth one within a few decades of the last one. And that sort of speaks to the rapidity of change that's taking place and the difficulty of all of us sort of adapting to that change. I don't care what age you are, especially those of us who are older maybe are having a harder time adapting, but it's more of a mindset issue than it is anything else. And so that is changing how we behave even as humans. A second major trend is something I call global trust collapsing. How many of you are familiar with the Edelman Trust Barometer? Edelman is a PR firm that does a trust barometer globally every year, and they look at, they survey basically stakeholders around the world on issues of trust against 4 institutions: government, media, business, and nonprofits. And for the last few years, that trust has been going down, down, down. There's less and less trust in the institutions that we used to maybe trust a little bit more. So that's another major mega trend. There's also this third mega trend, I call it the ethical paradox. I think we're living in a world where we're seeing extreme behaviors. On the one hand, we're seeing less ethical, more authoritarian kinds of behaviors at the government level, sometimes at the business level, but we're also seeing good actors, more good actors. Business is taking a lead, for example, on a lot of these issues. So we're seeing that. Number 4 is complex interconnected risk is rising. World Economic Forum, again, does a really great job every year. If you're not familiar with their global risk report, you really should be, because they have 5 categories of risk, and one of them is technological, and it's full of these sort of cutting edge analysis of where cyber risk and other kinds of technological risk interface and interact with the other kinds of risks that they talk about, which are economic, social, geopolitical, and environmental. Speaking of environmental, the 5th megatrend is ecological apocalypse. I don't need to tell you that climate change is a big deal, and we're seeing a lot of movement around the world, young people, older people, waking up to this reality that we don't have a lot of time to fix problems if we can fix them at all. So that's another mega trend. The new geopolitical abnormal is another issue that I think we're all sort of walking through, working through, living through, suffering through. A lot of change geopolitically around the world, a lot of it caused by our own country, but also maybe reflecting other forces that are in play, basically. The populism, decline of democracy, rise of more authoritarian leaders, the breakdown of some of the international alliances that we've seen over the last 70 years or so, since World War II. So there's a lot of geopolitical change. A 7th one is this rise of ESG. If you've been looking in this space at all, you will see that there are all kinds of major business heads and others who are starting to say companies need to pay attention to their ESG issues, environmental, social, and governance. And I'll have a few slides in a minute. Business as a new global social moral conscience. And I'll show you a slide showing from Edelman again how 76% of those surveyed found that they think that business needs to be the one that sets the tone because nobody else is, which is an interesting change, right? Hyper-transparency to super opacity. What I mean by that, the 9th one, is that when we started having social media and internet and everybody, with the democratization of information, everybody had access to everything, we had this sort of age of hyper-transparency. But now, in the last few years, with the deep fakes and the fake videos and voice and what have you, we're sort of moving into a period of what I call super opacity, meaning that everything is not really what it seems, or a lot of things aren't really what they seem, which is a scary thing, and it's again driven by technology, but of course also by people. And then finally, we're in a period now where there's future fear and we don't really know where we're going next. People worry about their jobs, that the robots will take over, AI will take over. So where are we going with all this? And so those are the 10 megatrends that I wanted to share with you, just to give context. So now I want to give you some sort of more focused information or sort of context on ESG. So ESG, again, environmental social governance. This has been around for a while in European companies. They actually, at the EU, if any of you work for European companies, you may know this, that the reporting companies, publicly traded reporting companies, many of them are now required to report on their ESG metrics. It's not just about financial reporting anymore. It's about environmental, social, and governance reporting. And cyber reporting or technological reporting may not be too far behind. And all of us are familiar with some of the metrics and the frameworks that are being created for cyber. And there's many different ways to skin the cat and show information. And at the same time, cyber, as compared to maybe ESG issues generally, cyber is not an issue where you want to do a lot of reporting publicly because you might be showing your vulnerabilities. So there's going to be a debate about this coming soon. This slide shows you from 3 trillion to 31 trillion is the estimate, depending on who you ask, of new opportunities to invest in sustainability and ESG. And the 3 trillion estimate comes from JP Morgan, and the 31 trillion comes from the Global Sustainable Investment Alliance. So any which way you look at it, it's increasing, it's growing every day. And this gives you another piece of this puzzle, which is that there are many more regulations that are coming up. I just mentioned the one about reporting your ESG metrics in the EU. This is a S&P Global summary of all the regulations that relate to ESG issues that have come up over the last 20 years, from 1997, where there's next to zero regulations, up to 2018, where we have more than 300 globally that apply to ESG reporting, metrics, regulations, et cetera. So this is definitely growing very, very rapidly and in the consciousness of people. And I would be amiss if I didn't say that a lot of what's happening also is driven by generational changes. The millennials are in the workforce now. They are demanding much more from companies. They are not just happy to grin and bear it. They want their companies to be climate sensitive. They want their companies to pay attention to Me Too, and they also have a major role to play in creating new technology, AI, other kinds of inventions. So, yes.
The slide's a little hard to see from the back. Could you tell me where we are now? And
this is 2018 right here, and this is 1997. So it's a 20-year.
There's no projection.
There's no projection. That's actual. Yeah. So it's probably more looking forward.
Do
yes.
you have any, do you know of any specific requirements that you said there is no any kind of reporting requirements for cyber? Do you foresee?
Public. Yeah. Well, it's a great question. I'm actually doing a white paper with a woman who's the head of digital and cyber strategy for Swiss Re in Switzerland. And we're actually doing a survey of board members and corporate people and so on to see whether they favor the idea of cyber reporting or not, because we see it coming down the pike, but it would be good to know what people are thinking. And so we're going to do a white paper on this, and we'll publish it in the next couple of months. But it's really trying to anticipate what will happen, because I think this is an area where we have to be really careful, because if companies that don't have a lot of cyber resilience are putting out metrics that don't look good, or if the metrics are, too invasive of their what they look like, they could be vulnerable to attack. So there's a layer of issues there that go way beyond anything from ESG reporting, I think. Yes.
When you're talking about something in terms of more detailed metrics than 10K publicly owned company, there's usually a section about cyber risk.
Right.
But if you look at Bank A and Bank B and they have the same public accounting firm, it's almost word for word boilerplate.
Right.
Really
and it isn't really, there's no actual metrics being
there's no
required.
metrics
Yeah,
behind it.
yeah.
Unless
it's just a risk
unless there's
statement.
litigation.
Right,
That's
exactly.
actually determinable about, let's say, the charging has a X amount is reserved, X 100 million is reserved,
Exactly.
less insurance. Yeah.
Exactly. And so the idea is, I mean, if the EU is already demanding ESG metrics, I'm not saying we're going to do that here in the US anytime soon, but the EU might, and if you're an international company.
If you do business in the EU,
exactly.
your EU subsidiaries.
Yeah. Yeah, so everybody needs to sort of think about this a little bit before it just kind of crashes on them. Yes?
You're thinking about KPIs as
I'm not really thinking about it, but I mean, to the extent that anybody is going to come up with these kinds of ideas of how to measure cyber resilience, for example, what does that mean? I'm sorry?
Do you have any you can share with us?
I don't have any right now, no. But I might have a little more once we've completed our research. But yeah, it's a totally open area right now. All right, let me keep moving. And again, this is just the BlackRock. Who's familiar with Larry Fink's BlackRock letters to the CEOs for the last couple of years? Again, this is about ESG, but it could become broader. And my lens is ESG and T, which includes the whole cyber thing, because I think we need to be prepared. And technology issues are intersecting with all these ESG issues, as I'll show you. But basically, in the last 2 years, BlackRock has said
through their annual letter to CEOs, that CEOs better start showing what they're doing on environmental issues, social issues, and governance issues. That includes Me Too and culture and, the kinds of things that typically companies have not been sharing publicly unless they have litigation. So it's something that's percolating in the water. Another interesting development in this particular, yes?
What's the effect of the BlackRock letter? Because most of their investing is index-based, so
Right.
they're not really making any decisions.
Yeah, it's basically putting pressure on CEOs to sort of think about what are they doing within their own companies in terms of doing metrics for environmental issues or for social issues, or knowing what their risks are and then providing some information to the investor. So even though it's indexed funds, I think they're going to have the position that we're going to be looking at this stuff, and we may say that you need to do more, which is name and shame maybe, or that kind of thing. So I don't know exactly what his ulterior purpose would be in terms of investment strategy, but I think it's putting pressure. And as this next slide shows you, the Business Roundtable is doing something similar but a little different, but it goes in the same direction, which is about a month ago, the Business Roundtable, which is basically the 200 most powerful companies' CEOs, issued a paper saying that shareholder value is no longer the be-all, end-all, that we need to think about other stakeholders. And for more progressive CEOs, let's say, or businesses, they have been thinking about other stakeholders in addition to shareholders. Of course, if you're a Milton Friedman fan, you know that shareholders are the be-all, end-all, and the financial results are the be-all, end-all. But they're now saying we're going to pay attention to employees' needs and wants, to customers' needs and wants, suppliers. So they're opening up the lens a little. Some people are saying it's a dollar late and a day short, a day late and a dollar short. But it shows this kind of movement towards opening the aperture on issues that are important, risks that are important to investors, to CEOs, and also to other stakeholders. And cyber really fits in that in a larger sense. This is the 76% of those who were surveyed say that CEOs should take the lead on change rather than waiting for government to impose it. And I think that's actually in the self-interest of businesses too, because as I was mentioning with the cyber reporting, you don't want to have the government coming with some horrible set of requirements that haven't been vetted or thought about before. So there's a little bit of a defense posture that I think businesses need to take by becoming more aggressive, perhaps, on defining these things. Yes?
Do you think part of the change in the environment is being driven by the historical over-reliance on CPA firms, the financial statements?
It's possible. Because
I know of a specific case. I mean,
Yeah.
going back to Statement of Accounting Standards 3, which is really the first time the CPA profession said, oh, yes, your IT systems and the controls around them actually can affect things like going concern. And then COSA, the first iteration, just said, oh, yeah, you got to look at IT standards, look at, if I remember exactly what, COVID, NIST, and ISO. Right? That's all. It's like one sentence. Come on, this was in the early mid-90s. And come on, that's a cop-out.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I have a biased perspective. I come from being a general counsel and an ethics and compliance and risk officer for several companies. I'm not a quantitative person and I'm not a technologist, but I'm coming at it from a qualitative, like what are the issues, what are the risks, what are the opportunities standpoint. And I really do think that there has been an over-reliance and piling on. If you think about boards, the audit committee oversees everything. And so when it comes to risk management, when it comes to enterprise risk management, when it comes to environmental health and safety issues, so I think we're moving in a direction where there's going to be a broader set of issues considered by the executive teams because they have to. And I think it also is a reflection of the turbulence that we're living in. Things are changing too fast, and so there's a lot of new risks that people need to be aware of.
Well, it's making directors and officers of a company personally liable.
Yeah.
And I think in the case of Target, I don't know what the status is. litigation, but I think there was a direct suit against the officers and directors.
Yeah, I believe so, too.
And I believe the insurance company said, sorry, we don't cover this.
Yeah, yeah. I hear you. So just sort of moving with this sort of story, so ESG, I think, is going to become more ESG&T, which is all interconnected. And I love to show this picture in particular. This is, again, from the World Economic Forum. It's a reflection of the interconnectedness of the 5 categories of risk, with the actual risks that are most relevant to the particular year. This is 2019. So they have economic, social, governance, geopolitical, and technological buckets of risk. And so you can find, extreme weather events are also connected to biodiversity. You have failure of regional global governance interconnected with terrorist attacks and interstate conflict and fiscal crises. So again, they produce this report every year. It's available for free, downloadable on the internet. And I highly recommend, if anybody interested in risk in general, and also diving in a little bit more on the role of technological risk relating. So my picture's a very simple one, but theirs really is backed up by data and information that I think is very valuable. And then I have this table, again, from my book, in which I talk about some of a sampling. This is basically just a sampling of the ESG issues that you would typically talk about or think about as a business. And environmental, like climate change, sustainability, water, air, et cetera. Social, you would have human rights, supply chain, labor rights, human slavery and trafficking. Under governance, you have corporate governance, of course, leadership, culture, corruption, fraud. And then I've added my own sort of list of emerging issues in technology. Now, not all of them apply to every business, obviously, but what I'm trying to do by getting people to think about this is, what are your technology issues? So make a list of those. Yes?
We can talk lawyer to lawyer because I argue that boards should be scared witless that their fiduciary duty is going to be intertwined inextricably with cybersecurity, data protection, and privacy. And that if they stub their toe, they're going to get whacked out. Mm-hmm. Just look at the board of British Airways right now. Mm-hmm. BA has an eye-popping, did I read it right, 500 million person class action?
Wow. I'm not familiar with that particular case.
I think it was with an M. I don't think it was 500,000.
Yeah.
Even if they survive that chairman's not long for this world.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's hard enough to convince boards to think about risk. Having them think about technological risk is even harder, but we all have to do this. It's part of our jobs is to try to bring these things up to the top, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But basically, this is, again, a lot of words, but the idea here behind this is every business, every organization, you can be a government agency, any community that is working together has to think about their ESG&T issues and how those issues can become risks, and also how those issues can become crises and be ready for the scenario planning and the crisis management. And then the thing that I like to say, you talked about scaring them witless. I agree with that, but I also like to put a little spoon of honey in there, because I think that companies and organizations that are really prepared for their issues and their risks can also find great opportunity inside those risks to create better processes, improvements, process improvements, and even better products and services.
Well, a spoonful of sugar, but I would go one beyond. You can find a market differentiator. It now increases your edge on your competitors.
Totally.
And I have actually spoken to institutional investors in alternative investment vehicles back in 2015, and they have told me in private that they are willing to take a haircut off of return on investment the more a fund can prove to them, not saying it in words,
right,
but evidence and demonstrate that they keep their trading-related and other highly proprietary, market-sensitive information where bots can trade ahead of you within a nanosecond, turn around and sell you back the same block that you were just looking at, and therefore you lose money, that they can gain an edge on their competitors when they're seeking to raise new money. That is where the rubber meets the road.
Agreed. Yeah, no, I think that's great. Now, I just have 4 examples I want to give you of the downside and the upside. So an environmental example. In fact, today in California, there's like 800,000 people without power because PG&E has had a terrible track record for years of not maintaining their trees and their distribution poles and wires and what have you over the years in such a way that there was terrible accidents and fires, and of course everybody remembers the Paradise Fire. And so PG&E is now becoming super preventative, and because there are high winds and dryness in the last few days, they've actually shut power down to like 800,000 Californians at a time. But basically they have a history. This is an excerpt from an article. Cat and mouse game, PG&E's long record of run-ins with regulators and courts. And this happens to companies that don't have the resilience that they've built, and in this case, environmental health and safety resilience. The other company, PSE&G, I happen to know very well because I was general counsel of their global division for a number of years. And health and safety and environmental issues are core to how they operate. And so if you just look at both of those companies in some detail, you will see that they're basically the upside and the downside stories. And you know, my question is, and this is where sort of the stakeholder piece comes in, which company would you rather work for? Unless you're a crisis manager, I think you probably want to work for PSE&G. Similar story here. This is a social example, and this is about health and safety and quality of products. And the terrible consequences for Boeing of the 737 MAX, which is still unraveling in terms of what really happened there. And there seems to be a history here, so it's still being found out. In the meantime, you have a company like L'Oreal, which also it's a cosmetics company, but it's almost like a pharmaceutical company, in that the consequences of their products can be serious to human health and safety. And they have been on top of their issues on a regular basis over the years, including developing artificial skin to test their products on instead of animals, including diversity initiatives. They're basically recognized as best in class. So again, I asked, who would you want to work for if you had a choice? Theranos, I think, speaks for itself. If anybody doesn't know about this story, this is Elizabeth Holmes, the only female unicorn at the time. Turns out to be a fraudster. And there's an amazing book that was written about the whole Theranos story. It reads like a thriller written by a Wall Street Journal reporter, and it's called Blood Money. And this story is still unraveling too. She basically defrauded a series of stakeholders, investors, partners, you name it. She had a product to test blood that supposedly would do it very easily and transmit information, and it was pretty much of a fraud. And she's going to be prosecuted trial next year in San Francisco. And then you have the case of Salesforce, a company that basically has nothing but good news because it has a really great leader. To me, everything goes back to who the leader is. They're number 2 this year. They were number 1 last year for best places to work. Their employees are, very satisfied if you go into their surveys and into reputational metrics. So again, which one would you prefer to work for from a governance standpoint? And then finally, I have a couple of thoughts here. And it's not because I'm in the Microsoft building, because it's actually in my book that I talk about this. So Microsoft, since Satya Nadella took over, has shown some real, not only great governance and good leadership and culture changes from where they were before, but they're very, very proactive about the technological issues, the AI issues, the facial recognition issues. They may not be perfect, but compared to our friends over at Facebook, I think we're talking about a yin and a yang here maybe. Again, who would you rather work for? If you're a crisis manager, maybe Facebook is a good place. So I now want to go into, let's see how we're doing, not so great. I want to go into some of the cyber governance and oversight issues. And I have this picture, I've shown it here before, but I just want to sort of go back to it because I think this is a synthesis of, depending on what you do, you can be an outside consultant, you can be an internal IT person or a lawyer or an accountant, or someone who's taking care of information security. At the end of the day, you want to have these three parts of your business sort of interconnected. You want to have your executive management thinking about technology issues as part of the strategy. Not every company is a technology company, but there are technological issues. What are you going to do about AI? What are you going to do about cybersecurity? There are all these different issues. So you want that to be part of the strategic thinking every year and planning every year and budget process, obviously. You want to have the board well informed on those things. You want to have the board overseeing in a way that I like to call it lean in governance rather than sit back governance, which is what we see so often in boards. Board members not interested, not savvy, not able to understand some of these issues, which takes me to a whole other direction, which I'm not going to belabor here, but it's basically we need to have better boards. We need to have more relevant people on those boards to be able to tackle some of these issues. But the board oversight and the executive management strategy is all well and good if it's not deeply interconnected and implemented by the teams of people who work in those organizations through interdisciplinary teams, cross-disciplinary risk management, enterprise risk management, whatever you call it. Cyber is not one person's area. Cybersecurity is not, it is complex in such a way that you want to have your lawyer, you want to have your IT person, you want to have your financial person, etc. Yes?
Sorry again, but those are all Siamese cats. So, in terms of department heads. Mm-hmm. So how can the board keep above that, the scratching?
Who's the Siamese cat? The people implementing?
Heads that you just told.
I agree. I worked in 4 different companies as an executive, and one of my worst problems is always getting people to talk to each other.
And the board doesn't want to get sucked into that.
No, the board doesn't want to get sucked into that, but the board should be asking questions about that. And the boards don't ask enough questions about how are you doing the risk management, how are you doing the cybersecurity activity that's relevant to your business.
So what would you recommend in terms of, so who should be the direct report? Should it be CISO directly to the board? Should it be CISO through the chief risk officer directly to the board?
I think each company is different. That's not a cop-out. I think the culture and the sort of behavioral patterns in each company are a little different. But I think the board should always ask to see the CISO, whether that CISO reports to chief risk or to someone else. There should be periods of time where the person directly responsible for cybersecurity management and implementation has an opportunity to talk to the board, even sometimes with executive session, meaning that nobody from management is present so that the board can actually ask the real questions.
Yeah, but that CISO better come with a translator, otherwise they'll turn
Well,
off
that's
in
the
about
problem
10
with a lot of
minutes.
CISOs. So we have a lot of language issues. Lawyers sometimes talk too much law. CISOs talk too much technology. But
No,
that's
what
why.
lawyers just talk too much.
Well, that's no, but we need to have these people talking to each other.
What you're describing turns into a resume generating event for the CISO.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. Yeah.
The challenge is that the CISO is reporting to a cost-based organization like a CIO.
Right.
Yes.
And that's where the problem is. I don't care if they report to the board or they report to the CEO.
I agree.
But the problem is that the CISO is part of a cost-based organization, and that's where the problems all start.
Yep.
And I was just talking to the gentleman here before that cybersecurity from a board perspective or from a leadership perspective has always been a checkbox mentality. Oh, we are going to be adhering to ISO 27001 of this framework.
Yep.
Or we are safe, or we have never been breached, so why should we worry about
Absolutely.
cybersecurity? Or, oh, we have X number of technological solutions and we can see an attack a mile away.
So let me give you an example. The reason I do stuff in this area is because my last company, which was a technology company, a big data analytics firm that was global, I was the chief risk. I'm sorry?
Not Cambridge Analytica. I was making
No.
Very bad joke.
No. A publicly traded, American-based company. Anyway, I was the head of audit, risk, and corporate responsibility. And they threw in information security because it was housed under the chief technology officer and it wasn't working. So they said, here, take this, Andrea. And so it took 6 months of blood, sweat, and tears on my part because my counterpart, who was the CISO, who was a native English speaker, could not speak clearly to me, and I had to keep asking and digging and sweating. And we had other people, and we came up with solutions, but it took a lot of time and blood, sweat, and tears for all of us to sort of get to the same place, and we then came to a really good set of conclusions, which we implemented. And I think everybody has to do that, and anyone who hasn't done that has to do that in their own company.
I have a better way, metrics.
Metrics, yeah, well, metrics are good too.
Look at an Arabic number and say, Christ, are we good like Goldman Sachs? Or God, do we suck?
Well, speaking of sucking and being wonderful, I want to mention one thing that's really important for all of us, and I found this to be important for me as I was going through the companies, and now that I'm doing outside consulting. Who is your leader? Is really the bottom line for me. Your CEO, does that person have sensitivity, understanding, empathy for these ESG and T issues, and in this case cyber, and in this case technological issues? Are they sensitive to these issues and understand that they're super important? And maybe they're the responsible leader who basically provides strong tone from the top and resources? Or are they basically just superficial, like some of the people that you just mentioned, who sort of say, oh yeah, we checked the box, we're good, where you're not building the resilience? Are they irresponsible where they do nothing? Or are they enlightened? And I put, I'll give you the bottom line here. I've just thrown some of the company names in here that we just looked at from an ESG and T standpoint. And I would put, stepping on my cable here, I would put Microsoft, Salesforce, L'Oreal, PSE&G on the higher end of the spectrum because they're actually, the leaders there are setting the right tone on these issues. And so the resources are being provided, the reporting to the boards is taking place, the governance is taking place. And some of these others, even though they're not necessarily technological issues, they're ESG issues, are not doing the right things and they're suffering the consequences. So I think going back to who is your leader and how sensitive and savvy are they to these issues and willing to incorporate them into the strategy of your business is really, really important. And it hopefully it doesn't have to take a big crisis like Marriott or BA or anyone else to get people to think about this. So again, I want to sort of leave you with a few sort of practical ideas, I guess. Do you have a system in if your companies, obviously, do you have a system in your companies where people are paying attention to what are the ESG and T issues, cyber issues that are most relevant to your business? If you're a healthcare company, it's going to be a little different than if you're a supermarket. But at the end of the day, you have issues. Those issues can become risks. Those risks can become crises. And then you can also learn from those particular situations and make your products and services better and create opportunity and value. As part of that equation, when you're thinking about your issues, your ESG and T issues and risks, do you know who your stakeholders are? This to me is where the sort of the relationship with reputation risk really takes place. So if you're just paying attention to your shareholders and as sort of a narrow financial results quarter to quarter short-termism where you're trying to extract the extra cent on your share per share to give back to your shareholders, that is a horse with blinders that's not paying attention to the ESG and T issues that could affect that adversely and or maybe even prop it up. So again, do you know who your most important stakeholders are? And there are some CEOs out there and some leaders out there who basically say, your employees are your most important stakeholder because they are the ones who are interfacing with the customer. So thinking about Starbucks, for example, the founder of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, used to say that my most important stakeholder are my employees because if they're happy, the customer's happy. And so each business has to think about it a little differently because you have different stakeholders, for different issues as well. If you're an oil and gas company and you're living in a rural community somewhere, and your oil and gas activities are having an impact on that local community, that community is a serious stakeholder. Those stakeholders can turn on you. The airline industry, we know how stakeholders, us, passengers in planes, can turn on an airline very quickly with social media. So again, this is an important piece of the equation, thinking about who are your cyber stakeholders. And here's a sort of a variation on the theme of who are your stakeholders, talking about a technology company stakeholders example. So if you're Microsoft or you're Salesforce or you're someone else in the tech field, your owners and investors clearly are a primary stakeholder, but your community is impacted by your technology products and services. Facial recognition technology, for example, in New York City, the police department, I think, does some of that. In other parts of the world, clearly. Those are stakeholders, those communities impacted by the technology. The owners and shareholders of non-tech companies that are about to get disrupted by you are potential stakeholders because they're competitors who might be disrupted out of existence. Non-governmental organizations and nonprofits can be stakeholders. If, for example, one of these nonprofit journalistic reporting nonprofits that basically outs scandals and issues, and they publish about you, you better be prepared to deal with that. Employees and third parties whose data is subject to company usage, those are stakeholders. So there's just a whole range of stakeholders that you would think about, and by knowing who they are and knowing what their issues are, you can then do the risk management, the crisis management, and also the issue management that helps you maybe build the better products and services and therefore create value. This is just sort of another way of looking at it, sort of the ESG&T issue value chain. If companies do these things, they're ending up with hopefully the value protection and value creation outcomes and maybe even innovation. But if they're not, it might be value destruction, and it means having people who are thinking about your ESG&T issues, such as PR and communications. Are they doing the research? Risk managers, are they doing the research and doing the enterprise risk management? Are you thinking about your stakeholders? Are you matching those risks to potential reputation risk through social media? Are you thinking about how that might interconnect? Are you matching it to opportunities? Are you doing like a root cause analysis when you have a problem, when you have a risk that's gone wrong? And are you finding those issues that cause that problem and going back and fixing it as part of your process improvements or maybe even product and service improvements? And then also matching it to crisis management preparedness. And again, cyber is part of this value chain because there are cyber issues and risks and security problems that need to be thought about. This is again another sort of visualization of the concept that we've been talking about interdisciplinary teams working together. I agree that often they're in silos, and I agree that often heads of different departments don't want to talk to each other. I've been there, I've done that. I haven't done it myself because I'm a big partisan of talking to people. I had a particular case in a company where I was trying to get something off the ground in a big way over a couple of years. I had the wrong boss, and I got the right boss, and suddenly I had all the resources and all the people talking to me because my new boss told them to talk to me, and we all got it together. And so that's why I keep going back to the idea of leaders are so critical. If your leaders are saying you have to collaborate, then people have to collaborate. But if you have a culture that doesn't incentivize that, I think Microsoft is an example of a company that changed dramatically because of the leader in terms of the culture and people talking to each other and so on. All right, this is a much bigger topic for another day, but I just wanted to sort of give you a snapshot of this but what I call the virtuous resilience life cycle. It's 8 elements of resilience, and it includes ESG&T issues. And so in this picture, you start with the governance at the very top. Is it working? Is it paying attention to these issues? Is it lean in instead of sit back? Do you have a culture of integrity and speak up? Think about Volkswagen. Nobody spoke up about the emissions cheating, and 10 years later it exploded into the scene because somebody discovered the issues. So do you have an empowered culture? Do you have emotional intelligence in terms of your stakeholders? Do you understand who they are? And again, for ESG and T issues, that's what I'm talking about here. Risk intelligence means, do you have a proper enterprise risk management program in place that brings in your cyber issues and brings in your technology risks? Having a holistic ESG and T strategy, that's what I was talking about a little bit earlier. Making sure that management is not just thinking like a horse with blinders about financial revenue, profits, and so on, but thinking about the ESG and T issues that are relevant to their business and incorporating them into the strategy. Performance equilibrium is really just, do the CEO, I'm tripping on my cables again, do the CEO, the C-suite, and the rest of the management have incentives to not only make the money and the sales that they're supposed to make, but doing it in the right way, thinking about the environmental, social, governance, and technology issues that are part of that business. So is there some kind of a balanced scorecard or something of that nature? Crisis readiness, we talked about a few times. And then last but not least, if you have all these elements sort of working together, you can also have this sort of innovation ethos, which is all about learning lessons from mistakes, allowing mistakes to happen, working together, making things better, improving, etc. And this applies as much to cyber issues and cybersecurity as it does to the other issues that are part of, of this portfolio of issues that I'm talking about. So last but not least, the whole idea here is that if you have all this in place and you're thinking about these issues and you have the empowerment from above and the resources and the tone, and you get to do these improvements because you have a culture that says it's okay to speak up and it's okay to do a deep dive root cause analysis and find out what was mistaken and make those improvements, you can actually create new valuable services and products or improved ones. And there are two examples. I did a study for the conference board a few years ago, and we looked at 5 major companies, global companies, that had very good internal cyber resilience and risk management, but they also had, 2 of them had these products and services that they also sold. And so they were not only resilient on the inside, but they were also creating that value by selling, in one case, cybersecurity insurance, and in the other case, cyber risk software, cybersecurity software. One was a technology company, the other was a financial and insurance company. So each business has a different set of products and services and criteria, but if you think about it as resilience plus value, I really think that there's a way to not only tell the scary stories, but also tell the upside stories. And we need to tell that to the board members and to the C-suite and be able to discuss it with each other and make it happen. So this is just an example from the UN Global Pulse. Does anybody know what the Global Pulse is from the United Nations? Yeah, it's the Sustainable Development Goals, basically applied to big data, analytics, and so on, and projects that they're doing, private-public projects that the UN is doing with business around the world to achieve those 17 Sustainable Development Goals by improving them with technology. So an example is SDG number 1 is no poverty. Spending patterns on mobile phone services can provide proxy indicators of income levels. So there's people working on creating software programs for cell phones. As many of you may know, some of the least advanced economies in Africa, for example, have the most advanced cellular towers, and they can use their phones to do a lot of different things. So again, this is just a way of thinking about how you can transform risk into value, and how there's also great public-private partnerships out there, which can also include cyber issues, cyber risk management. And so I just like to have people think a little bit about what you can do. This is my last slide, I promise. This is really just a regurgitation of a lot of the things we've talked about. Know what your CEO's ESG&T leadership style is. If it's receptive, you're going to be able to get things done. If it's not, it's going to be a struggle, and I think all of us have been there. Know what your ESG&T issues are and how cyber intersects with those issues. Know who your stakeholders are. Ensure that the ESG&T risk and opportunity is integrated with the strategy of the business. And then finally, exercise proactive ESG&T risk management. Technology and cyber need to be part of ERM. They have to be reports to the board at least annually, I would say more frequently. And then be part of your company's crisis management. I think that's critically important. So I don't know how much time we have left, but there's a comment in the back.
I don't want to treat the board like children.
Louder, please, I can't.
I don't want to treat the board like a child. But they're scared of this black hole, getting sucked into this black hole and ending up in a different universe, meaning without their seat and their reputation and their accolades and everything else that goes with being a board member of whoever. How do you recommend gently achieving those five?
I think it begins with the CEO. It begins with the CEO because if the CEO is receptive, then a lot can happen. But if the CEO isn't receptive, this stuff will not happen unless there's a crisis. And then, of course, all hands on deck. But I think
that's easy. I'll just bring a black hat in and hack into their phone.
Well,
right?
yeah, and that's what's happening, right? I mean, but I think what has to happen at the management level is the people who are in charge of the CISOs, the chief risk officers, the general counsels, they need to talk to each other and they need to collaborate, even if the boss isn't really into it. Building the resilience, building the systems, building the processes, and then nudging slowly but surely up into the board. I have a feeling that the hook is being, yes. So thank you all very much. Yes, of course. Thank you.
So good afternoon. My name is Viral Trivedi and I am a representative of an organization called AM CDT. I'm the Chief Business Officer. My background has been in industrial cybersecurity, and I have worked for organizations like GE, many oil and gas companies, many power and utility industries, as well as I've also been part of the IT side for the first 10 years of my career. Before we get into this particular presentation, it's extremely knowledgeable. It's an animated flow, so if you want to take pictures, wait till the end because you will see the whole thing at the end of the last slide. I also have a detailed white paper on this particular presentation, so if you guys would like to read more about it in detail, I can share that with, please shoot me an email. I have my business cards here. Before I begin, I just want to understand the audience here. How many of you are aware of where we are from an industrial revolution point of view? Do we know the differences between Industry 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and what we are going through right now, which is Industry 4.0? Okay, well, we're gonna briefly go over it. Going back in 1700s, Industry 1.0 was focusing on mechanization, steam, power, getting things growing. Then came 1870s, 100 years later, mass production, assembly lines. That was Industry 2.0. Industry 3.0 in mid-1900s, 1969, around that time, we started seeing automation, computers being part of factory floors, power plants, manufacturing facilities, transportation environments. So a lot of automation and electronics started coming into play. And that brings us to where we are today, which is Industry 4.0. All of that now can be controlled by a click of a button. You're sitting here in this building and you can look at your power plant. You can see the production rates that things are working at. And you can see how your assets are performing, your machines, your equipment, where your employees are they working in their shifts? Are they taking a break. All that stuff now is being monitored remotely. What are the advantages of that? So going through the advantages of that is because we are collecting a lot of data from all these environments, all these machines, all these assets, the people involved, and that data is providing valuable insights to a lot of decision makers to say, hey, this particular machine might die in 3 months if we don't do maintenance at the right time. Or we need to fine-tune a certain valve in a conveyor belt to make sure that it runs smoothly. Or a plane engine that has the best efficiency when it's flying long distance, long haul flights. So first, initially it's running at 1,000 rounds per minute, but wait, after 10, 15, 20 flights, it's now dropping down to like say 900 rounds per minute, which means it's consuming more fuel. Industry 4.0 solutions enable organizations to see those kind of issues. And that way they can save money, they can save the unplanned downtimes that happen in these environments, and absolutely they can also look into any kind of issues that are appearing from hardware point of view, from machine point of view, from people point of view. So that's what Industry 4.0 is about. The presentation here today is about all this is good, but it comes with cyber risks. And that's what I'm going to walk you through a nice little animated flow of how a data that is being taken from a asset, in my example, you'll see a wind turbine, and then that data flows within the plant environment or the local environment. Then how is that data taken into, for processing into the IT side or the cloud side? Currently, most of these solutions that are coming out in the Industry 4.0 are cloud-based. So I have shown a graphic in there you will see, which is a cloud. And in the end, how the user accesses that data. So that journey all the way from the asset, from the machine, all the way to the end user who's going to take advantage of their data, how we secure that data, how we protect those assets, how the journey, how the communication is going to be secured. So that's what we are going to walk through. So critical assets are very, very important part of the industrial operations in day-to-day. They generate, as I said, paramount, like lots and lots of data. And that data is being taken advantage of by many organizations because it provides analytics, it improves efficiency. And that data can definitely be a competitive advantage in this market where you are competing with a lot of different organizations. But it requires a lot of interconnectivity of machines, and all that stuff introduces cyber risks. So how do we secure industrial data and unlock its potential is what we are going to see here. So let's look at how the operational technology data is converted into IT data and how we protect that raw machine data. So here you'll see an example of a wind turbine and how all the different types of data is being collected. So initially, what we do is that industrial environments generate this data at a machine level. So these are your assets. Here we are talking about wind turbines that is generating telemetry data from all these machines. It's getting collected and it is controlled by the PLCs. And if you guys don't understand these terms, these are industrial equipments, controllers that send commands and functions to these machines to do what they're supposed to do. In this case, they are generating power. And according to these PLC, there's some human being sitting in the operator area or the control room and saying that, hey, the wind is blowing from the west, turn the blades. So those are the simple functions. But these functions are not sent through. Now in the Industry 3.0 and 4.0 are sent through computers, and they are somehow connected through a distributed control system because wind farms are pretty large. So at each step of the journey, the data is at risk of exposure. Now one might think, wait, but these environments are not even yet connected to the IT world, or they're not even connected to the internet. But you'll be surprised. I'm not going to show you that website right now, but try going and looking at a website called shodan.io, SHODAN.io. Try a free Google account, sign in on that, and take a look at it, and just type the word PLC. PLC stands for Programmable Logic Controllers that controls all these different industrial equipments. Yesterday, when I was presenting the same topic at a power grid conference, it had around 5,680 PLCs that are visibly connected to the internet. And you can see their IP addresses, the protocols that it runs, and all that stuff. And some of them are even not password protected. So I can be sitting here, or any one of us can be sitting here and controlling that particular asset that that PLC is working on. So that's the reason it's important to make sure that at each step of the journey, the data is at risk of exposure, disruption, and even tampering. So initially, when the data is being collected, that data has to be protected before it even goes to the IT side of the environment. And that's where, if you look at the left side of this, by the end of this presentation, you'll see the whole presentation showing you from left to the right. So here we are just talking about the facilities. So if you look at data ingestion happens at a plant level, or at a manufacturing facility, or at a power facility, or a wind turbine. And these are the most common components you will see: technological components, computers, engineering workstations, servers, communication devices, connectivity devices are part of a power plant or a manufacturing plant or a transportation. Even this building that we are in has this kind of environment, which is basically controlling the flow of AC, as you asked. So AC, the example of AC and the controller that we have somewhere on this floor, that controller is basically the PLC. It's telling the AC unit to increase the temperature and decrease the temperature. Now imagine somebody hacks into that particular device or that controller and just makes this room extremely cold or extremely hot. So those are the kind of effects you see in a plant environment, that any of these controllers, so these controllers are the lowermost level before it communicates with the assets here, which is the wind turbine or AC unit in this building, or a water facility in this, a water tank in this building. So this is where we have to focus on how do we protect this environment before even the data leaves this environment and goes into the IT side. Now there are so many different solutions in the market. There are 31 companies that provide you firewalls, unidirectional firewalls that only talk one way, asset inventory tools that will help you build this environment to be a secure environment. Why? Because first of all, if you look at it today, because of Industry 3.0, 2.0, many, I don't want to throw statistics here, but there are many companies who have no idea what's even there. And today, as I gave you the example of Shodan.io, you will see, it'll tell you that it has a Siemens PLC, Honeywell PLC, Rockwell Automation, Allen Bradley. It's just a tremendous amount of information that can be easily be accessed from websites like Shodan. So if organizations have no visibility into this environment that you see here on the left, then they have no way to protect it. If you can't see something, you can't protect it. So there are many solutions out there in the market today that helps you protect this environment, understand this environment, provide visibility into this environment, and then build solutions to secure it. Now there are, as I said, there are so many firewalls that help you and protect this environment. Now some might say, well, if this environment is never connected to the IT world, are we still at risk? What do you guys think? If this environment, a factory floor or a power plant, is not connected to the internet or even to the IT part of the organization, do you think is this particular power plant or this wind turbine farm is at risk? Do you know any examples of how that can happen? That's one. But like I say, a technological hack. How would a technological hack would happen? But how would that happen?
You don't get like live information on what's going on. Say for example, wind direction. You don't know.
So that's an environmental threat. I mean, that's an environmental issue. From a technological point of view, if you look at certain issues that have happened in past, people have just dropped in USBs with malware in it, and then they have this internal environment which is not connected, now suddenly has connectivity to the outside world. So there are USBs, there are USB related, and some people even connect their phones to charge in these devices. These engineering workstations have USB ports. So people say, oh, let me connect my phone to this so that I can charge. And guess what? You might have had a malware in that environment on your phone that has now penetrated this plant environment. So that is the reason there are so many issues that we have to start working before technological solutions, to be focusing on people awareness. Small things that we can do to fix it is block your USBs, block your email access through your phones into these environments. Have these individuals be more aware of what they are doing. I've walked down on ships, on commercial ships, on cruise liners, and I walked out on merchant Navy ships. These people have open passwords, walking around in the engineering area at the bridge. And I asked the captain once, I'm like, why is your password visibly open? And this was at a commercial cruise liner. He's like, well, I'm all over the ship. I have to give certain commands to my bridge staff, so I don't want them to wait for me to read out the whole password so that they can immediately take action based on my command. I'm like, that's great, absolutely, safety first. That's very big paramount importance of a ship's captain. My next question to him is, how often do you change that password? And he's like, I don't know, I've been here for 6 years and that's the same password. So the policies, the governance, the procedures, because one of his employees leave and come as a passenger on that ship, now can make that ship a shipping dock in the middle of the ocean for pirates. Because now the password to the main engineering station on the bridge is easily available. So there's a lot of awareness that needs to go into place when you protect this environment. So as I said, a strategy that needs to happen, a proper strategy to protect this environment is not just technological solutions, but human awareness, a lot of cybersecurity awareness training, changing of passwords, a lot of policies and procedures need to go. Now, taking the data from this plant into the IT side, you're not just going to say, hey, let me put a connectivity, a router, or an internet, and then do it. The secure way to do it is that process all that data locally at a DMZ, at an edge of both the environments, so that that particular environment is fully secure. The data that is leaving that environment is secure. People would ask, okay, so is that a firewall? Well, this is a combination of multiple things. It's a database server, it's a cleaner, it takes the data that is only needed, it's a firewall also, and anything that happens on that device also has to be secure. So this device by itself has to be secure. So the controls that go into that is how to harden that device, edge device. One of the first control is make sure that the device hardened to remove unnecessary applications on it, any unnecessary services, any unnecessary protocols that do not use. The second control is making sure that the trusted platform module is included past. So this particular device is taking so much sensitive data from here. So make sure that nobody can hack into the hardware of that device and take that data away from it. The next control is device certificates, making sure that if that device is communicating with anything else, there's proper certificate authorities deployed on those. Make sure the identity and access management controls are defined for that particular device so that the right user or the appropriate users are accessing the information and it's correctly verified. And then the data packets are being inspected before it leaves that environment and goes into the IT side of the world. So you make sure that is encryption enabled so that there is a proper communication channel that's going into the IT side. And then the applications that get installed. Are you sure these applications that you buy from third-party vendors are secure? Are they open source? Making sure that these applications are tested before you use them to collect the data, process the data, and then transfer the data. And then you need to make sure that the communication protocol, either it's HTTPS, TLS, some kind of encryption methodology is deployed. So that's where you need to make sure that the communication outside into the IT is properly done. Now taking the data, once it goes into the IT side, make sure that the connectivity into the IT side is secure. Now I work for many power companies, and I've seen that they have their private connectivities, a private fiber line or MPLS T1 lines that they get connected from this environment to that environment, which is good. But adding encryption on top of that is even better because anybody can hack into your IT environment and still have access to the industrial site or the control environment that you are in. And if you're using public internet, make sure that you have proper VPNs, secure encrypted VPN connections that are going between the edge device towards the IT device. So now let's say the data is now in the IT side of the world. As I said before in the beginning, that most of the solutions are cloud-based. That's the cloud diagram that I've shown here. So most of the times people are wondering that, okay, if you're taking the data to the cloud, whose responsibility is to protect that data? Now we are using cloud providers like AWS, Microsoft, Google. Whose responsibility once the data goes into the cloud environment? Well, the reality is it's a shared responsibility because that cloud provider is as good as a data center sitting in your location or a hosted location such as Equinix, for example. So it's a shared responsibility of the organization as well as the cloud service provider. Now, cloud service providers provide a lot of security controls and measures that are part of their offering when you are purchasing a industrial IoT platform, which you can leverage to protect your information and data once it sits in the cloud. But we need to make sure that there are multiple different industry security standards that are applied to that cloud provider. Let's say if it's your in-house data center, make sure that you follow certain standards and guidelines. There are ISO 27001, there is Cloud Security Alliance security controls, making sure that whatever environment that you are building or using as through a vendor such as a CSP, cloud service provider, they have multiple different certification, different standards. Make sure that the provider's environment or the cloud provider's environment has proper physical and data security capabilities. Are they measuring it? Can anybody just walk in? Now, when I work with government facilities and a lot of government clients, the only company right now has a full-fledged solution to protect government data is AWS GovCloud. Microsoft is also coming up with their GovCloud, and Google is also on its trail. But right now, the only working solution that is fully functional with FedRAMP, ITAR, and all sorts of FISMA controls developed is AWS GovCloud. So a lot of customers who want to store a sensitive amount of data, and they are choosing AWS GovCloud. So making sure that the cloud provider has those capabilities is also very important. Then geographic safety. Now, let's say you're part of an organization that works out of the United States. Is the cloud provider hosting your data outside the country? Now, if you are a European-based company, they are going to implement GDPR into it. They're going to talk about, oh wait, why is my data of my plant in London being hosted in a server sitting somewhere in Seattle or somewhere in West Coast of the United States? So make sure that when you are implementing those solutions, there is data sovereignty and geographic conditioning happening so that the data doesn't leave the boundaries of your country. Make sure there is a disaster recovery and business continuity planning for your provider. So there is active deployment. Are they dual availability? Do they have multiple places they store? And again, going back to the previous point where geographic restrictions are there, you want to make sure that within one country there are multiple different backups and other data centers available. Cloud by itself, by its nature, is a multi-tenant environment. So your physical infrastructure might be same, but that physical infrastructure virtually might be shared with multiple other customers. So please work with your cloud service provider to understand those particular security controls, that how your data is not leaked to another tenant's data and then vice versa. And they don't have access to each other's information. And then definitely whatever applications that are being built. So there are many industrial IoT platforms that are being built by companies like GE, Siemens. How do they follow? Put that in your RFPs, RFQs, that are you following a secure software development lifecycle? Do you follow certain standards? Do you go through multiple OAuth type testing? Do you go through multiple bi-yearly or quarterly penetration tests on the applications that you are providing us to provide the great analytics from our machine data? So making sure that anything that sits on the cloud, either it's built in-house or procured from an industrial IoT platform or from a cloud service provider, make sure that everything is tested, because you can't just sit there. And as I said before, that it's a shared responsibility. If you don't ask, they're not going to tell you. But at the same time, you need to make sure that your responsibility starts where you know where your data is going through which applications, making sure that the applications that is using that data are securely built, and then there are proper secure mechanisms involved in accessing that data. Now, data retention. So let's say after 2 years you don't want to use this particular service, and you decided to cancel the contract. Make sure that the provider that you're working with has a proper data retention policy and deletion processes. So once the contract ends, is it going to be within 30 days, 15 days? Make sure that's negotiated in the contract. Because these cloud service providers, they will keep the data as long as you guys tell them not to delete it. So make sure that becomes a part of your contractual agreement. And then comes the physical infrastructure of a cloud environment or your physical environment or physical data centers. Make sure that the correct firewalls, correct intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems are involved, all sorts of DDoS protection is involved, because all these environments are eventually going to weaken the data that you have collected from an industrial facility and put it into the IT environment, and all these loopholes are going to start open up. You will be susceptible to DDoS attacks. You will be susceptible to people trying to hack into your environment, because that's an IT environment. IT constantly keeps changing. Patches are running behind. Patches are there. So make sure you as an organization responsible for your tenancy in a cloud also are constantly following up on the security practices that you would have followed if the data was sitting in your environment. So I'm going to just give it. Okay, so this is the slide I was talking about. So as you see, we started all the way on the left, where the data from a machine, from a turbine or a power plant is being collected, being processed and ingested in a power plant environment. Then at the edge, that same data is being processed through and making sure that all the security processes are being followed on the edge devices. The device is hardened, the trusted platform. Once all that stuff is taken care of, making sure that the network provider that provides communication into the IT side or the cloud side or the internet has a different security controls, transport layer security, encryption available, making sure that the VPN is correctly configured before the data leaves your industrial facility and goes into the IT side. Once it's in the IT, we went through at least 60% of them, and then I fast forwarded to this slide. So if you see the most of the stuff on the right, you have to make sure that all the services that are being deployed in the IT or cloud environment has gone through a secure software development lifecycle. User access, there's a lot of dynamic application security testing and static application security testing happening, making sure that the penetration testing is happening on those applications to make sure people are following certain standards. Ask them for reports. If you have built that application, you should be working with your development teams to figure out that are these applications being constantly checked for. And if a IIoT platform, industrial IoT platform provider gives you certain analytics software, make sure that they also go through a different level of security activities as defined on the right side of the cloud, because that is what's going to constantly keep them abreast with what's going to happen, because attackers are always changing their methods. And if you constantly don't repeat and rinse to understand where your weaknesses are, one day your industrial facility will be attacked, and we all will be sitting here and wondering that how did that happen. So we have to make sure that this blueprint of an industrial IoT digital transformation is followed not just at the industrial level and not just at the IT level, but end to end. And the last piece is the users. So let's say I'm a plant operator. I have this fancy software that we just bought from GE, that software is now providing me a lot of information, but I'm no longer sitting in that plant. I'm sitting at Starbucks nearby, and I'm getting to see how my plant and my machinery is being operated. Make sure that there is enough security from user access and authentication point of view. If that particular individual, he or she is accessing the plant that they work at, make sure that the security controls are defined in such that they can only access that plant and no other plant. The second layer of user access and authentication gets applied at the user level is that it's called the role-based access control. Make sure that that particular operator only sees the machines that they are supposed to see and not the whole plant. Now, if you're a manager or a middle management organization, they can see the whole plant, but then they can only see their plant but not the plant somewhere else. So if you constantly keep providing all these defense in depth technologies, solutions, security controls, that's how you're going to keep defeating the attacker. Because if any of these pieces are missed, that's an entry point for an attacker to get into an industrial facility and cause a disaster. And the disaster can not just be financial, but loss of life. It could be loss of production, loss of downtime, financial losses, so many different things. So that's why it's very important that if we are going down the path of Industry 4.0, we have to make sure that the data that we have collected all the way from our industrial facilities, which is now being accessed from a Starbucks nearby, is secure end to end. I'll take some questions, and I'm doing a workshop on this tomorrow at 9 o'clock, but it's much more detailed. I'm going through the differences between IT and industrial controls, how certain IT ways cannot be implemented in the industrial environment because how they are different. IT starts scanning tools. There are so many security tools available out there that, okay, let me go scan and find out how many IP addresses and how many machines are there. If I try to use those same tools in an industrial facility, it'll bring the whole plant down. So I'm going to go through that tomorrow at 9 o'clock on a workshop, which is going to explain how we do this, what are the certain differences between IT and industrial environments, what are the different cybersecurity tools out there available, and then we'll go through a little deep dive on how PLC works, how these HMI works, how they communicate with each other, what are the different protocols that they communicate, and how they are different from the IT side. So the IT side usually works on TCP/IP, right? It's all over the internet. The industrial, anybody knows what they operate on? That's one of the protocols. But they're basically serial level communications, ones and zeros. So it's a completely different ballgame when you look at, so that's what I'm going to dissect tomorrow. We are going to talk deeply about the industrial side, and then we are going to say how that is different from the IT side. What I do and what my company does is that we basically help organizations who are transforming digitally from their industrial facilities into the IT side or adopting industrial IoT platforms. We help them build this blueprint on both on the IT as well as on the industrial side. My personal experience, as I said in the beginning, I've worked for GE. I've done over 150 deployments of a solution like this for multiple different industrial verticals. And I have done this. I was living and breathing this day in, day out. I've been on cruise ships. I've been on merchant Navy ships. I've been on nuclear power plants. And the amount of security that you see, they think that they have been sitting there for 30 years. I had a foreman who come and told me, son, you were not even born since I've been working here. And now you're going to tell me how to run my plant? And that's what I was interested in talking in the previous talk. I don't know how many of you attended the previous talk here, is that the mindset, the culture of bringing these two worlds together has to be first addressed before even you start talking technology. So there's a lot of awareness that goes into this. I never start with solutions. I never talk about security. When I talk to the C-levels, my first conversation is, first, forget your staff. How much are you aware of cybersecurity? Because if you are from a top level not serious about it, the foreman is going to will have the guts to talk to me the way he did. Because he doesn't understand that for them it's a matter of safety. I've been to a factory, multiple factories, and the first thing you enter, it says 300 days without an event. I don't know how many of y'all have been on a factory. But that's, for them, safety is a paramount. That's the outcome they are looking for. The CEO cares about, can you save me money? Can you make me money? And the middle management says, is the productivity running? So that kind of conversation in cybersecurity needs to happen at those levels, but we need to focus on the outcomes each individual groups are looking forward to. So absolutely, a CEO will see a solution from an industrial IoT organization. Wow, you're telling me I'm going to get insights and my unplanned downtimes are going to be zeroed down? Absolutely, let's buy it. But then the same operator might well, you're trying to take my job away now? the problem is that that cultural shift is extremely important, and it's still happening. It's only been 5 years industrial IoT platforms have come into play. There are not that many companies out there who are providing. GE, Siemens, Honeywell, and now C3 IoT. These are the companies who are providing industrial IoT platforms. But now there are some companies who are just coming up with softwares on AWS and say, hey, we'll provide you industrial analytics of your equipment. So you don't need a platform by itself. So there are so many different ways to take advantage of these technological advances that are happening in the industrial world that we have to make sure that security is taken care of. We understand what are the loopholes that we are going to get ourselves introduced to if we do. And if we don't, then it's just a disaster waiting to happen. And most of the time, I get the answer, well, we have never been breached. I'm like, well, you have never been connected to the internet before. That's why you have not been breached. But guess what? You can still get breached because the Ukrainian facilities, the Stuxnet that happened in Iran, it did not happen through a phishing email attack. Somebody accessed email. Somebody delivered hand-delivered a USB outside the plant, and they connected into the computer, the engineering workstation, and that's how they ended up gaining access. And it was a very targeted attack towards the Siemens PLC. So people think that they cannot be attacked because they are not connected. It's false. Now that we have extra time, let me show you that Shodan thing that I was talking to you about. I mean, it really scares me at times, to be honest with you. It's a paid service for detailed access. Anyway. But let's say, as I gave you an example, PLC. What number did I give you before? 5,600, it's showing 5,783. Every day that number goes up. Programmable logic controllers at many factories or power plants are connected to the internet. I'll give you what kind of information it provides. It's a telecom PLC. It's going through a Cisco. So now I know the infrastructure that is being used. It's the type of information that you get. Now let's try something else, more targeted. Just by looking at this, can anybody tell me, I'm not even going to click one IP, but can anyone tell me what's going on here? Just pick the top one, but whatever information is in front of you. There's an HTTP connection into an ABB device, which is probably, ABB is known for their industrial control systems that they manufacture. But it's not ABB's problem, it's the organization that's using it is now connecting that environment towards the internet without any security. Or even if they have security, that there's enough information someone can find out from this website, from this tool, to figure out how to hack into it. If you're an advanced hacker, you will be able to break into these environments. So that number keeps going up and up. I put PLC before, but let's see if I can show you. I mean, there are so many different searches I was showing yesterday. There's webcams, IoT devices. So this search engine is specifically for IoT devices. And many of these, you can have webcams, you can have your Alexas, your phones. If they are easily connected, they can be tracked on this website. And it'll give you see all the way on the left, it gives you a global map of what devices are connected globally right now on the internet. And then it also gives you an historical view if you have a paid service. And then it'll also tell you, if you click on the exploits, what are the different cybersecurity exploits people have tried to take advantage of when trying to connect it to ABB. The micro SCADA server. SCADA is an extremely heavily used industrial control technology. It's basically called supervisory control and data acquisition. I'll take questions.
You mentioned about the firewalls that are in one direction.
Unidirectional firewalls. Yeah.
I guess, then how do you communicate with the device? You don't have like.
There's no inbound communication towards the device. That's the purpose of unidirectional firewall. You're just sending the data out for analytics. You're not deploying that firewall for an inbound communication to control that asset. If people can control, if I get access to that PLC, I can control it because they don't have any unidirectional firewall. Any of these PLCs that we are seeing, they are controllable right now. Sitting in this room, if I use my other advanced cybersecurity hacking tools, I can hack that PLC and control that PLC that is controlling the asset. That's why, because they don't have a unidirectional firewall, they have two-way communication. But unidirectional firewall, what it does, that they let you still take the data out of the environment and take it into the IT side or the cloud for analytics. So that's one of the solutions out there. There are a couple of companies, Owl Security, Waterfall Security. So there are a couple of companies out there that provide unidirectional firewalls.
Yes. I'm not sure if I have a formed question here, but I'll think about it. I work for an MSSP, and just in my personal world of experience, I'm more accustomed to being on the IT side versus the OT side. Are industrial companies or utilities or other firms, are they sending their log data out to third parties for
So there are solutions. We are one of them. We have an OT, we call the industrial
Is there
world.
value to it? I mean,
Oh yes, absolutely. There's a lot of value to it
we
because
always talk about like high fidelity, low fidelity. Are these high
so it
fidelity?
depends on the industry. So if you're in a power industry, then there are high level cyber assets, low level cyber assets, and completely sensitive ones. So anything that's sensitive, that sits in the ESP. So ESP term comes, electrical security perimeter, comes in the power industry because of NERC-CIP. NERC-CIP is a very heavily regulatory requirement for power and utility industry. So now, because of these cloud-based solutions that we saw before,
Send the logs out to a third
well,
party?
no. So NERC-CIP does not allow you to take data to the
They
cloud.
have in-house monitoring capabilities?
They have in-house monitoring capabilities, but what me and my partner, we have written, we just filed a patent, it's patent pending. We filed a patent on a process and methodology to do NERC-CIP on cloud. Because NERC-CIP was only written for brick and mortar data centers in-house. But there are so many different applications in cloud available to take advantage of. A lot of companies are now saying that, oh, we want to take advantage of the cloud solution, but NERC-CIP doesn't allow us. We are $1 million fine if we send our data outside our ESP. So there is a way we have been able to figure out how to take advantage of the cloud and not violate NERC-CIP laws. But answering your question, if you are an OT SOC, so MSSP, there is a way with a unidirectional firewall to take that data out, because now you're not just monitoring the IT components, but you're also be able to monitor the industrial components, the PLCs, the HMIs, the serial level communication. And now,
There's a big learning curve if your experience is only...
absolutely, and we do that. That's why I never start security topics in the organizations with selling security solutions. We said, let's do an awareness training. Let's get the IT guys understand the OT. One more question?
What would a nuclear power plant want anything to do with the public internet? It doesn't. I don't understand the risk versus the value. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. So if you attend tomorrow, if you're here tomorrow at 9 o'clock, I can show you a lot of value why power plants, and especially nuclear power plants, take advantage of industrial IoT platforms. To answer your question in short, there's a lot of valuation on the asset, not the production of what that plant is doing, but the machine. Now that machine you get so much insight through sensors on that machine, on that centrifuge, that okay, how efficiently can we make it so that we can produce more power? So that kind of data is now being given to the controller or the operator, that okay, if I make some fine-tuning tweaks because of this analytics that just gave me, I think I can generate 2 megawatts more per hour than I was able to do before. Right. So there's a use case that I use usually in the airline industries, that Emirates Airlines, when I used to work for GE, they came to us for predictive analytics software. Like, how can you help us? Well, okay, we saved them $7 million a year per plane just by cleaning, but on water bills. Because they're a Middle Eastern airline. They fly over desert. They collect sand particles that get stuck on the plane blades. These blades get heavy. So they're running at 1,000 rounds per minute when they are clean, but when they get dirty, that thing has dropped down to 700 rounds per minute. You're burning more fuel and you're spending more money they had no idea why they were burning more fuel And secondly, they were spending $7 million per plane in water bills just to clean that. They knew that it was happening, but they did not know when was the exact time to clean. So you're basically avoiding unplanned downtime. So there are the value adds that come.
I understand that in that scenario, but at the risk of like a nuclear power plant being owned, you can't, so they save money per year, but you're increasing the...
Nuclear power plant is specifically an example, but...
I'm just using that,
right.
or even a regular power plant.
No, but so there is something called DROM. You and I don't want to take over someone else's time. I'll give you a very good example on the regular power plant, because I just came from a power grid conference last night. Thank you very much.
Well, on behalf of the coalition, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
So every day we hear some company getting breached or their data getting compromised. Those companies, there is an endless list of those enterprises as big as Sony or Equifax or Capital One, and this list goes on. Government offices are not not immune to those breaches. Federal government, state government, actually I follow these cyber breaches, and what I have been noticing these days is county offices, they are sort of a target for ransomware attacks. We have heard about Atlanta, Texas, and this morning I heard about this city in California, Bakersfield. These smaller counties are like small businesses who do not have all the resources to protect themselves. Talking about small businesses, when I said this morning we found out that this Bakersfield County was breached, meaning it wasn't breached this morning, we found out. We don't know when they found out. This morning they just publicly admitted, hey, they have been breached, and the breach was on their server where their citizens log in and do financial transactions, and they don't know when it was actually breached. So the point I'm trying to make here is 70% of small businesses are hacked, whether they know or not, and all of those businesses, they don't find out. Sometimes they never find out that they have been breached unless they lose access to their data, meaning they got some ransomware attack and they don't have access to it, so then they know, okay, they got to take some action. 50% of those smaller businesses, including county offices, they have no idea how to protect themselves. All the mayors, around 14 or 1500 mayors, because of this ransomware going on, they had a meeting. And in that meeting, they talked about not paying the ransomware, which is a good thing. When we pay the ransomware, it's an economics of demand and supply. More you pay, more those actors, they're gonna do those activities. And if we stop paying them, eventually it will stop. But as a small business or even as a government county, you have no choice. If you want to run your business, you have to get your data back. Average cost of reviving your business after an attack is $150,000. And not all the businesses can afford that. So most of or more than half the smaller businesses, when they are breached, they go out of business, because they don't have resources to come back and run their business. When we say the cost of reviving the business, there are some known costs. As you can see on the slide, technical investigation, cybersecurity improvements after the fact, once you are breached or hacked, then you say, okay, we got to do something, and then we take hasty decisions to buy products and services. So try to avoid those incidents happening in the future. In addition to these known costs, there are some unknown costs. I call them ghost costs. Examples of those are your insurance premium goes high, you lose your contracts, you lose your clients because when they were trying to contact you when you were down, they go to your competitors. Last but not the least is you lose your reputation, which is a business loss, and it's not directly known cost to revive from the business. We all know, but I still have this slide. What is the most valuable resource today? We know it's not the gold or it's not the oil. I didn't mean to put this vegetable oil slide here. What I meant is oil. We know the most valuable asset for any business is its data. And are we doing enough to protect this data? Again, we are just a click away from jeopardizing our business goal. So, what should we do to avoid those incidents? The process should start with the business strategy. When we form a business, as I mentioned in the beginning, IS security should be part of the business risk management. Our IS risk management should be part of the business risk management. So we need to get our senior management involved from the very beginning in this process. And when we talk about risk management, there are various components: firewalls, antivirus, IPS, IDS, patch management. But I'm only going to talk about 3 very nitty-gritty components of IS risk management, and we will explain those. Whenever I think about those 3 components, which are the first one, I call it backup. And the second one is users awareness, and the third one is insurance. But talking about these 3 things, whenever I'm in front of IT crowd, it sounds like I'm telling the importance of doing your homework to college students or to high schoolers, which is very basic. So before I talk about these 3 components, I'm going to talk something different. I'm going to talk about SAT. We all know high school kids, they take SAT exams so they can get into their dream colleges. And they prepare for those SAT exams, and most of the kids, they take classes to prepare for those SAT exams. So my son, he signed up for the SAT class. He signed up for online SAT class. I happened to be with him when his class started. So when he signed up, I thought, he will learn something new. His knowledge level is going to improve, and he will get the better score in SAT. So the class started. There was an introduction session in the very beginning, and then the instructor started about talking the strategy, how you gonna perform in that exam. And it was about you gonna have multiple question, X number of questions, but you will have limited time. That's very basic for any exams. Even when we go for our IT exams, hey, you have limited time, so just do the questions you know, and whatever you don't know, you come back and do the best you know first. So that was also fine. And then after that, they started talking about the strategy. I thought, now he's going to learn something. But I had tons of examples, but I'm going to take one example. SAT exam is about maths and English. So this is about his English portion of the class. You're going to get one excerpt. So, and there will be some questions related to that specific excerpt. So what I would think is you read that excerpt and then you answer those questions. The trick was, no, don't do that, don't read it. Just read the first question, second question, and there will be some question in online, whatever, 8 or 9 or 10, author is saying so such and such. What do you make out of it, or what author is trying to say, or what he should have said? So he said, don't read the entire excerpt. Just read a line before and line after and that line, and you will be able to answer. Same way, you answer all other questions. Once you are done answering all the questions, you may or may not know what this excerpt is about, but that doesn't matter. You have answered the questions, move on, because you have to score high. And there were similar examples on the math side. I'm telling you my personal story. My daughter, who is 1 year older than my son, during the break, I told her, it's like 3 hours. We are all he's just talking about tricks. So is this like half day or 1 day? This class is like 5 or 6 days, whole day class, like 5 or 6 hours. And I was surprised to what she answered me. Every single class is all about that. We don't learn anything when we go for SAT classes. The only thing we learn is how to answer those questions, so we get the best score, or we improve our score from our previous SAT exam. So I talked about SAT in my business strategy class. So I'll come back to the topic. I'll talk about 3 components. The first one is backup. We all know, and I picked up these 3 topics. Doesn't matter what we do, what we buy, what we implement, all those security components, but still we know this breach can happen to us. So the only thing which can bring us back is the backup. So most of the companies, their backup, meaning you buy some backup solution, it could be software or hardware, and implement that backup, and we say, okay, our backup is in place. The backup is not just buying and implementing a solution. The backup should start with writing a backup policy. And the first thing you want to do in that policy is identify your key assets you want to back up. And then there are multiple other aspects of the backup. Number 1, of course, is what you want to back up. You have to identify what retention policy you want. What is your RTO, recovery time objective? What is your recovery point objective? And what is your retention requirement? Retention is not only how long you want to keep the data. Retention also means once that retention is done, you want to get rid of the data. If your retention requirement is 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, you should not have the data sitting on your devices which is older than your retention requirement. The next step, after identifying what you want to back up and how you want to back up, including your retention policy, RTO, RPO, the next thing is who's going to monitor the backup. We all have heard those stories. When you have a backup in place, but one day when you really need to restore your backup, you find out our backup stopped working 3.5 months back. Or what you are trying to restore, we were not backing up that specific server or the application. And the reason, most likely the reason is that server you decommissioned that server, you set up a new server, and that was never made part of the backup. Or you upgraded the application in a different folder and you never implemented your backup checklist. The next thing about that list goes on. The next thing is restoration process. Because of this, when we go and try to restore and we are surprised that even though we are backing up, we are unable to restore, test restore should also be part of the backup process. We should restore a different server, a different piece of information, or a different application in every test restore cycle. You want to do it on a quarterly basis or monthly basis or bi-weekly or weekly, but that process has to be there. So the point I'm trying to make is backup is not just buying a backup solution and implementing. It's not set and forget. Unfortunately, it's not set and forget. It's writing the policy, and it's a living document. You always have to keep on working on this document. If you can work on it monthly basis, quarterly basis, or at least yearly basis. Next in the list is users awareness training. I think anyone in IT I can talk to and they can say, hey, we have subscription to either FishMe or KnowBefore, so we have this process in place. What we do when we have the users awareness training, we send out those training videos to our users, and then we collect the data, who passed those tests, who failed the test, or there are some users in any company who didn't even bother taking the test. And when users fail, we send them the second training. Hey, now you got to take another training. And until they start passing, we keep sending them training again and again. And some companies, they go a step further. They send phishing simulations to their users, and they try to observe who are the vulnerable users. They're gonna click on it or not. So the users who click on those emails, we go back and send them the training again. So what we are trying to achieve is eventually get a high score, a high positive score, so we have a better statistics to share with our senior management or the stakeholders. Hey, the investment we did in the user awareness training, it's paying off because our statistics is showing it. What we are missing here is, are we actually changing the behavior of those very limited user? Maybe we are able to take our message to majority of the users, but not maybe 10% or 5% or 2%. And the problem here is not even 2%. One single user can jeopardize the entire business, the entire IS infrastructure. So changing the behavior, the users who are not getting the idea, I'll give you one example that should be part of our users awareness training, and we can come up with similar ideas. If a user is not trying to understand, what we could do is we can take away his or her access from the information they need for a week. If a week is too much, for a couple days, for 1 day, or maybe for a couple hours. That user is not able to perform his or her job duties. Then we can have the conversation, you didn't have access to your information for a couple hours and you couldn't perform. Imagine if the entire company doesn't have access to the information for a week or for a month or maybe forever. Before I jump into my next component of managing this risk is, I wanna show you some slides. Julia Roberts, she has reportedly 30 million insurance for her smile. And not just actors and players also, he has insurance for his legs. And Bruce Springsteen has insurance for his vocal cords. We have insurance for health, accident, in some cases for our jaws, for hips, but what about our data? Getting insurance is very important, and again, a lot of companies, they have the cyber insurance policy in place, but again, from the perspective of taking it off, okay, we have another check in our list of things we want to do. Buying an insurance is also a process which has to continue. When we get the insurance, we have to make sure that all the requirements are in place, any company can come and sell you the cybersecurity insurance, but they will give you a big checklist, and that checklist is everything, all the best practices, all the possible best practices you should have on your network, like do you have IPS in place, do you update your firewall, do you have a disaster recovery plan, do you have pen testing from a third-party company. Most of the times, all those things we check yes, and we get the policy and we make a plan, okay, we got to work on all those things. But if we are missing those things, if just keeping that paper is not going to do anything for us. If there is a incident and if we don't have those best practices in place, we're not getting anything from the insurance companies. Lot of folks here are from they maintain some or the other mandatory or suggested regulation. It could be Department of Financial Services, NYC RR 500, HIPAA, SOX, or these are suggested regulation for law firms, Opinion 483. Same thing goes on when we are meeting the compliance regulation requirements. We are doing everything that compliance needs so that we are in compliance. But the idea behind that compliance is all those compliances, they are trying to make sure that any company, either it's publicly traded or a healthcare or a law firm, they are securing the data of their clients or patients. And at the same time, they are securing their IS information infrastructure so they can continue to run their business. Just meeting the compliance requirement from the checkpoint, or just to score the card that, hey, we are in compliance, is not gonna help us achieve our business goals. So here are the key takeaways from my experience in IT industry. Again, I'm only talking about 3 components. The list is much bigger than 3. Backup is not just a word backup, buying a solution and implementing. It's a continuous process which has to be implemented all the times. Same goes for insurance and for the users awareness training. That's all I have for today, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer, or I also have my contact email. Feel free to email me if you have any questions after this presentation, and I'll be happy to answer those. Thank you. I'm sorry, do I think?
Chief Risk Officer should be where the CISO reports into, at least one of a line, maybe double line up to the chair, but do you think the CRO should be where the CISO reports?
You are saying should CRO report to, or CISO should report to CRO?
That's correct.
Okay. Yes, CISO should report to CRO, because CRO's responsibility is for any risk. So, and CISO is responsible, meaning it's not a correct answer to say only for IT, but that's what, Information Security Officer and Chief Risk Officer is top of any risk. So, yes, I would say CISO should report to CRO. So my presentation was not about, talking about any specific area. It was very hands-on what we do on the floor. And I picked up 3 things. I had 4, but just to wrap it up in half an hour, I excluded the incident management from, but that's another very critical part of either we can call it IS security or, for our business strategy. So he did. So yeah, now I'm gonna brag about myself. He only took the exam first, only once, and he got 1580. Wow. So I don't remember. Yeah, that's a priceless. That's the answer. Yeah.
There's those who pay didn't have their children.
So, the price will be now he's looking at all the big colleges. So, that will come to me next year. Yeah. So that will be the real price.
We're going to hack that.
Let's see. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy rest of the evening here.